Chapter 1836. Not many people could understand what had just happened. Because of the distance and vision, everyone only saw that Cain was indeed suppressing Garush, but at the last moment, Garush directly killed Cain. The wild cheers of the crowd covered everything, including Bane's shout, "Poison! Garush's axe is poisonous. That despicable guy murdered my father." Did anyone hear that? Yes, all the Taurens around, including Wajin, Varrock, Dranos, Garavix and others not far away, heard it. Although every orc around them was cheering and roaring, at least they all noticed this scene. The duel just now was definitely unreasonable. There was a huge conspiracy behind it. Delano jumped off the arena and flipped over Cain's body while suppressing the unhappiness in his heart. He immediately saw the green venom on Cain's chest and the strange green color on the edge of the great chief's blood roar. Wajin stared at this scene, then he suddenly turned his head and shouted, "Varrock Salyafar!" Wajin called out a name. He not only called Varrock, who was the notary, but also the warlord who held the core military power of the tribe. Only Varrock was qualified to declare this a shameful makara, and only he could redress Cain's grievances. Varrock's mouth squirmed for a long time, but in the end, he could not spit out a word. Declare this duel invalid? Easy. This kind of obvious evidence, as long as he shouted at Varrock, would be able to prove it immediately. But what about after that? Garush was bound to be despised by the entire tribe, and then who would lead the tribe? There was no talent in the tribe who could be the great chief. Although Garush was reckless, he at least killed the traitor and won. Except for him, no one could suppress the current young orcs. Perhaps it was a mistake to let him continue to be the chief, but who would dare to say that they would be able to lead the tribe out of this desperate predicament? Wajin? No, his identity as a troll was a huge problem. He could not suppress these young orcs. And although Garush had a bad personality, his personal strength was definitely the best in the tribe. Unless it was Gruul, no one, including Xueqi, could beat him in Makarali. Thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind. In the end, he sighed and lowered his head. Xueqi understood, and he did not blame Varrock for his choice. There was only endless sorrow. He turned around and walked past Bane, patting the next leader of the Tauren tribe who had witnessed his father being murdered. "One day, we will make Garush pay for this blood debt." Without waiting for Bane to respond, Wajin left the dueling field. The poison was not done by Garush, but by Magatha Grim Totem. But that was no longer important. That night, Garush decided to hold a banquet in Agrima and hung Cain's head on the city gate. Everything was blamed on Garush. That same night, Xueqi found Varrock, took out an oath written on wyvern skin, and declared to him, "From this moment on, I, Xueqi, on behalf of the Darkspear Trolls, officially declare our peaceful departure from the tribe in accordance with the terms of the declaration made with Chief Sar. If Garush chooses to advance, we, the Darkspear Trolls, will wait for the war in the Echo Islands. Of course, you can also raise your axe to me at this moment, and I will respond with my spear." Varrock was stunned, his lips trembling. Is this necessary? You have made your choice. The Darkspear Trolls have also made their choice. That's all. Without accepting any persuasion, Xueqi left Varrock standing alone in the chieftain's hall. What was even more shocking was that almost immediately after, Dranos also found Varrock. The Forsaken have announced their departure from the tribe. "No, this is not true, you are. I used to be an orc, and you used to be my father. But I am already dead, and the dead are not qualified to have the same rights as the living, are they? Garush didn't think much of me anyway. But I am now the leader of the Forsaken, and I have to be responsible for my people. So be it, father, if you can't stay. Welcome to Winterspring. Or like our chieftain's father, Grom, you can rely on Duke Marcus. For you, that is also a good choice." Ignoring his father who was completely speechless, Delanos used his ice-cold body to hug his father who still had blood flowing and body temperature, then threw down an oath and left proudly. That night, the goblins and Taurens also announced their departure. Garavix said in his sharp voice, "I don't mind owing people money, but I really mind being owed money. The tribe owes me too much money. Sar can't pay it back, Garush doesn't want to pay it back at all, and wants my life. The Rustwater conglomerate is finished with the tribe. You want the Rustwater conglomerate to return to the tribe? Yes, pay us the money you owe first." Ben said resolutely, "This is an unfair duel. The Taurens do not recognize Cairn Bloodhoof's glorious death. The Taurens have no intention of fighting against the tribe, but if the tribe chooses to attack Mulgore, the Taurens will fight to the end at Thundercliff. Overnight, the tribe fell apart. When Varrock handed the 4 contracts to give up the tribe's identity to Garush, who woke up with a hangover the next morning, Garush lost his temper on the spot. Betrayal. This is a shameless betrayal. Who gave them the right to betray the tribe? Garush flew into a rage on the spot. Varrock was unmoved. This was set by the previous chieftain Sar, when he pulled the 4 major races into the tribe. At that time, all the chieftains of the tribe signed the agreement, including me representing the Blackstone clan, Sar representing the Frostwolf clan, and Grom representing the Warsong clan, which is your father. Back then, every chieftain agreed that all races were equal and had the right to leave peacefully as long as the tribe was not in a state of war. Garush clutched his slightly painful head. Isn't the tribe in a state of war now? Who ordered it to be lifted? It's you, chieftain. After you killed Cairn Bloodhoof, you personally announced this decision in front of thousands of orcs at the banquet last night, Varrock said in a deep voice. Garush's face suddenly turned red. He did not admit his fault, but instead vented his anger on the few chieftains. In any case, abandoning the tribe without permission is betrayal. I want to punish those who dare to leave the tribe behind my back. Garush waved his bloody roar. As the chieftain, of course you have the right to declare war. Remember, if you do this, it means that you are declaring war on the 4 major races at the same time, and they are very likely to fall to the alliance. The most important thing is that we neither have a ship to the Echo Islands nor enough food to support an army of more than 100,000 to attack any other race. Varrock retorted coldly. Chapter 1837. By the way, the Kodo, which was the best at carrying things, had also been brought back by the Minotaurs. The Horde could only rely on hard labor. Or use warwolves to pull the carts. Garush was stunned. Didn't I order for the barren lands to be hunted? Varrock said. The barren lands don't have enough prey to support an army of 500,000. Even if the Great Rift Valley is an oasis, it won't do. In the later stages of the game, our hunters would have to travel more than 50 miles to hunt every day. To put it bluntly, the Alliance was waiting for the Horde to start a war. Varrock had sworn that no matter who the chief was, he would obey the orders of the one in the position. The brave beastmen would always keep their oaths. He was very satisfied with the beastmen's sense of supremacy. If the Horde did not listen to a single warning, he would immediately kill them. After more than 3 hours, the 4 women were finally taken care of. Duque, who was hugging one on each side, opened a bottle of 1982 Sprite. Kalia was a little confused. She tilted her head. Is that so? Elucia, who was lying on the chaise longue, laughed. I knew it. In the business world, Duque, what you've been doing all this time is stealing raw materials. If you really want the Horde to be good, you should do what we did to help Kalia. Not only should we buy raw materials, but we should also build railways and factories in the places of production. We can also improve the local industry while doing fine processing. Garush was furious that the 4 leaders had left without saying goodbye. He did look down on the other races, but that did not mean he did not enjoy the pleasure of commanding them. Everyone? Jaina was stunned. But would the beastmen dare? Hee. The Horde has endured long enough. For 12 years, Duque, who had been advocating cooperation between the Alliance and the Horde in public and in private, finally admitted his attitude towards the Horde in private for the first time. After Garush came to power and tore up the trade treaty with the Alliance immediately started a Cold War. Duque opened a portal and went to several places. He dragged Kalia from Lordaeron, Elucia from South Sea City, and Tyrant from Mount Hyjal. Even worse, he could not find a place to rob even if he wanted to. Actually, it was not as if there were none. The most prosperous places in Orgrimmar were Azhara and Grey Valley. Ha ha ha. Good news. Great news. Dooku was beaming with joy. Such a big event, we should find everyone to celebrate. Most of the time, Garush felt that the Tauren and Trolls were troublesome races that only gave him complaints about not being able to live. When they did leave the tribe, Garush immediately became angry again. The irascible Garush did not give up and asked for several methods, all of which were mercilessly rejected by Varrock. When Varrock reported this to Garrus, the great tribal chief flew into a rage. His violent temper made every beastman who had no choice but to enter the great tribal chief's hall tremble with fear. Tyrant was a little curious. Duke, did you want to destroy the horde from the start, or did you change your mind midway and go against the horde? In the end, he still suppressed his anger. Duque used his free hand to hold Tyrant's Mount Hygel as he said honestly, "From the start, I wanted to destroy the horde. Unfortunately, I've never succeeded. Everything is decided by the times." He blurted out, "So many of us have died. Why is there no food left?" Only the orc tribe was left, and they had no food or resources at all. Of course in this life, because Duque tricked Jaina in advance, her young heart suffered the most indelible blow. Jaina, who was known as fair trade with the tribe, had always been like Duque. On the surface, she acted like a good person, but in private, she never gave up on scheming against the tribe. Without airships, there would be no large-scale transportation. Oh no! Duque had probably opened a bottle of fruit wine that the night elves had stored for 82 years with a special method and poured himself a full cup. Last night, the goblins had retreated. What made Varrock despair was that the Rustwater Consortium had taken away all the valuable things made by the goblins, such as the hot air balloon airships that connected Orgrimmar to other places. The only thing that made Varrock feel lucky was that Gurus seemed to know the gap between them and the Alliance. He did not dare to start a war with the Alliance. Otherwise, he would really be looking for death. On the other side, when Duque, who was waiting for news from Odom and Vastur, suddenly heard that the horde had split up, Duque did not say anything. He hugged Jaina happily and spun a few times on the spot. This was because she was the one that Duque had tortured the most. Almost every inch of her skin was planted with strawberries. He wanted to go on an expedition to destroy races like the Trolls and Tauren, but was told that there was no food. This surprised him. "Ha ha! I couldn't hold it in. Ha ha ha!" Duque pretended to be stupid. Varrock said coldly, "Great Chief, we need food to fight a war. Our methods of transporting and storing food are too backward. For every bag of food we transport to the Barren Lands, we will lose 3 bags of food along the way. In order to destroy Gujar, Orgrimmar's granaries are almost empty." This caused the horde's control over the various regions to drop by several levels. These words were nothing to a traditional orc, but they pierced deeply into Varrock Salyafar's heart. For a moment, old Varrock almost wanted to pull out his axe and give this idiotic chief a good beating. In order to deal with the invasion of the Firelands, the Dalajan had already arrived at Mount Hygel. The Alliance had stationed troops in Grey Valley, Azhara, and Theramor's Dust Wallow Swamp. Among the 4 women, Jaina had the most complicated relationship with the horde in history. Before Theramor was hit by the magic bomb, focusing Rainbow, Jaina had a very long honeymoon period with the horde. Jaina, who was said to have sold her father out, had a very good relationship with her rumored male friend, Thrall, which caused her father trouble. The wyverns alone could not meet the speed and quantity of transportation. The horde did not have a railway, so all transportation would return to the more primitive era of animal power. When Duque brought all the harem he could find to Karazhan's bedroom, Duque laughed and began to break the armor of the women. Where the Duke Divine Sword was, the terrifying scene of 999 consecutive strikes shocked everyone present. "Oh, if you didn't say it, I would have thought that you, Duke Marcus, were a selfless hero who only cared about the public. But that's good. It proves that I didn't misjudge you. By the way, why are you purposely tormenting me?" Jaina also held a glass of wine, but she glared at Duque with dissatisfaction. Chapter 1838. Elucia burst into laughter. "Silly queen, it's fortunate that the man you're with is Duque. Otherwise, you'd still be counting the money after being sold." Kalia was dissatisfied. "Humph. If it wasn't for Duque forcing me, I wouldn't have wanted to be the queen. I might even become the #1 adventurer in the Alliance, as well as a professional cleric in the Alliance's hero group." Kalia's words made sense, and Elucia was defeated. The 2 girls immediately became a ball of fun. Ah, that beautiful spring scenery. Duque almost wanted to end his time as a sage and have some fun with someone else. Jaina stopped him. "Let's talk business first. Otherwise, I won't be able to feel at ease." "All right." Duque was a little disappointed. "Don't be like this. Teacher I'll do whatever you want with the students later. Answer my question first." Duque perked up. "All right. How are we going to face the horde?" Jaina asked. Duque thought for a moment. "First of all, The alliance must continue to maintain a lukewarm attitude towards the big tribes in a broad sense. If the tribe is divided today, Wujin will leave the tribe with his subordinates, and we will immediately rush to the Echo Islands at night, make some promises, or put some race under our protection. The alliance will be at a disadvantage. Oh! Even a veteran politician like Tyrant was surprised, much less a political noob like Kalia. Jaina blinked. Are you afraid that the tribe will think that the division of the tribe is a conspiracy of the alliance? Duque shook his head. No. Most importantly, even though Brainless Roar had torn the tribe apart, the tribe's cohesion were still there. If Garush had killed Thrall in the duel yesterday, I might consider doing it right away. But as long as the tribe is not rotten to the bone, once Sal returns, the tribe will reform into a fist. Isn't it a good chance now? Jaina asked. Duque sighed. It's a chance, but it's not enough. Our alliance is too strong and gives the tribes too much pressure. As long as there was any sign of trouble in the alliance, even if the 5 tribes had irreconcilable internal conflicts, they would immediately unite again. And the key is that the alliance still lacks a righteous cause. Tyrant nodded. Yes, the alliance is indeed not a violent organization. The alliance clearly lacked a reason to wipe out the entire tribe. However, would Garush give the alliance such a reason? His brain wasn't good, but he shouldn't be that crazy, right? At least he hasn't declared war on the alliance yet. No, I think, maybe everyone underestimated his stupidity. Of course, it's just that he doesn't have the chance now. When he does. Duque scrutinized it. In this life, the tribe was even more chaotic than before, and the division was even more severe. In the end, it was because Duque's own arrangements over the years had taken effect. He commanded the alliance to suppress the Horde's expansion, causing the Horde's territory to shrink by at least half. At the very least, the Tirisful woodland was no longer controlled by Undercity, and the Long Song forest was no longer controlled by the Blood Elves led by Lord Thema. With less territory, the corresponding resources were far less than in history. Naturally, their ability to resist pressure was even worse. In order to ensure the survival of the Beast Men, Gurus consumed the population and completely plundered the resources of the other 4 races for the Beast Men to use. Naturally, the backlash was even greater. It could be said that in this matter, the alliance had already gained the absolute upper hand. Unfortunately, Nisario did not die, and Brainless Roar did not further seek death. Duque wanted the alliance to make a move, but it was still lacking a little bit. Although he was happy, Duque could only suppress the ecstasy in his heart and not announce anything to the public. At this time, Kalia said a little strangely, "Yes, speaking of which, you've also accepted Sister Irel. Why didn't you call her for your secret celebration, Duque?" Duque had a strange look on his face. It was Jaina who giggled and said, "Of course we have to find her for the celebration, but there are many things that can't be told to her. If she knows, all the Dreenii will know." Indeed, Hoof was a little mature. Unfortunately, she still had the mentality of a typical young girl. Anything good in one's heart could never be hidden from the people around them. It was such a big thing that Duque wanted to secretly deal with the Horde. It was good enough that the various tight-lipped queens knew about it. Even if all the participants of the Throne Council had a tacit understanding, some things should not be announced in advance. At this time, Hoof sent a magic message. Duque, I heard that the Horde has split. Don't say anything, come over immediately, I have something important to inform you." When Hoof stepped out of the portal, Duque did not say anything and directly pointed his sword at Hoof. After a round of Duque's 999 godly swords, the 4 women even came up to help put down Hoof, causing Hoof to exhale more than it inhaled. Then Duque slowly informed Hoof that his attitude towards the Horde was to wait and see. The butterfly effect caused by Duque, the butterfly, had really changed Azeroth too much. Originally, in history, the Cataclysm should have been Sal's most glorious moment. Sal, who had been promoted to the Shaman of Salvation because of the Cataclysm, should have been widely praised throughout the entire world and received the greatest recognition from the Sleeping Dragon Temple. Unfortunately, with Duque's existence, it seemed that there was nothing for Sal to do. At this moment, in Nagrand, Sal, who was wholeheartedly practicing the way of shaman, suddenly received news from the spirit of the earth. What? Duque killed the fire demon King Ragnaros and officially replaced it as the supreme lord of the fire elemental world? And forced all fire elemental creatures to serve the Alliance mages first? Sal's heart was like a level 12 hurricane. Because the broken planet Draenor, where Nagrand was located, was too far away from planet Azeroth, in the absence of special magic communication, it was normal to rely on the elemental spirit to transmit the news for such a long time. He felt terrible in his heart. He gave up his power and left the Horde, of course, because he was forced by the political situation. What he really wanted was to protect the world of Azeroth, to become a demigod, and to gain the recognition of him and the tribe from the Sleeping Dragon Temple. At least in the general trend, he would not be left behind by the Alliance. Otherwise, if every world-destroying event had nothing to do with the tribe, and if the Alliance really wanted to attack the tribe, the Long Sleep God Temple and the Protectors would definitely stand by and watch, or even help the Alliance. At that time, the Horde would really be finished. But Xueqi, sitting on the throne of the King of Fire, was definitely destroying Sal's plan. The way of shaman was to communicate with the elemental spirit, which was a relationship of request. It was absolutely different from Xueqi's. I'm the Emperor, you do whatever I want you to do. Xueqi made the fire elementals serve the Alliance first. To put it bluntly, in the future, the shamans of the Horde would not be able to use fire elementals to attack the Alliance. Otherwise, they would turn around and burn the shamans first. This feeling of being stuck at the source was like being strangled by a rope that could pull you up and hang you at any time. Chapter 1839. This is bad. Xueqi will definitely let Sylvanas, who is already a demigod of wind, deal with Al-Akir, and let Vashj, who is also a demigod, enter the throne of tides. If all three elements are controlled by the Alliance. Thrall did not dare to continue imagining it. No. I have to change direction. The priority should be the Earth. This is my last chance to overtake them. Thrall was unknowingly getting a little impatient. He did not realize that impatience was the worst thing to do when it came to the Earth. Due to the lack of information, Thrall did not realize that there was a mortal called Magni Bronzebeard who was already so much ahead of him in the path of the Earth. While Thrall was getting impatient, Xueqi was enjoying the clumsy pillow talk. Xueqi, let me tell you. Beast men are all brutal fellows. Sob, sob, sob. Don't talk, savor it. Xueqi said righteously as he pressed down on her head and held her horn. Hoof rolled her eyes, but could only bury her head in her work. Hearing that the tribe was splitting, the Draenei, who had a deep hatred for the beast men, naturally had other thoughts. So-called forgiveness was *T to the middle and lower class Draenei. You killed my entire family. Do you expect me to say, long live forgiveness and wait for you to kill me? Xueqi saw Hoof's clumsy but hard work and gave her some hope. Before the crisis of the world's destruction is over, the Alliance will not make any moves. At least he managed to appease Hoof and the Draenei. Anyway, those who understood would naturally understand. The key was that Xueqi did not say anything from start to end. After the tribe split, Xueqi waited bitterly for 3 days before he finally received the first piece of good news. As a demigod of the Azeroth Weave, Xueqi was extremely sensitive to changes in the elements. After all, the biggest access points for the elements in the Weave were fire and ice. The fire element flowed unimpeded, and the Weave could receive as much as the fire elemental world overflowed. There was no need to be too serious in monitoring the fluctuations of the water element. Before this moment arrived, the supply of water elements was unstable. Tide Hunter Neptulin had never communicated with Xueqi. Ever since Xueqi established the Weave, he had been walking the path of Hydraxia's water elementals. It wasn't very generous, but at least Duke Hadasis could give him a 5% share. Suddenly, Xueqi was pleasantly surprised to find that the share had jumped from 5% to 51%. In the next second, the magic communication with Vashj that had been blocked for a long time returned to normal. In the magic mirror, Vashj's long red hair fluttered in the deep sea, giving off a mysterious and hazy beauty. She respectfully crossed her arms on her shoulders and bowed towards Xueqi on the other side of the screen. Then, she transmitted her soul voice. Dear Master, your most loyal servant Celia did not disappoint you. In the tidal throne, she slew the king of sea monsters, Ozamat, and saved the water elemental lord, Tide Hunter Neptulin. After my persuasion, Neptulin is now willing to follow me and serve you as the supreme ruler. Well done. My Celia. When you come back, I will reward you well. This conversation contained too many hidden words from both sides. Vashj clearly referred to herself as a demigod in all public occasions. But in front of Xueqi, she would always be the little maid that Xueqi saved in Azhara's palace. And Xueqi called her my Celia. This kind of recognition was the biggest reward for Vashj. There seemed to be some kind of liquid in the water from the corner of Vasht's eyes. That should be tears. There was another image in the magic mirror, and it immediately switched to Neptulin. Neptulin was a huge humanoid creature, almost 10 stories tall, similar to Lager. He had a dark blue humanoid upper body and a cone-like water elemental lower body, as if he was wearing a skirt. He had an almost rectangular face and hair that looked like 5 curved pieces of blue marble inlaid on it. A sapphire the size of a carriage hung on a huge golden chain. It looked very strange. He was not in good condition, because he had just been tortured by the sea monster lord. Huge whip marks and sucker bite marks could be seen all over his hard body, which looked a little like blue marble. Of course, Xueqi also saw the scars of swords and arrows. This scene made Xueqi want to laugh. Needless to say, this was the mark of Vasht persuading Neptulin on behalf of Xueqi. Among the 4 elemental lords, Neptulin was famous for his wisdom. During the ancient war of the Dark Empire 25,000 years ago, Neptulin the Tidehunter was always on guard against Al-Akir's treacherous schemes. He also controlled his subordinates to prevent them from attacking the stronghold of Sarazen the Mother of Stone. When the armies of fire, wind, and earth fought each other on the land of Azeroth, the Tidehunter would cleverly divide and conquer his enemies. Every time the enemy tried to flee, Neptulin would sweep away the wave so high that even the tallest mountain in Salazarn would feel ashamed of itself. Neptulin liked to play with his prey, dragging them into the water and letting them escape. Sometimes, he would banish an unfortunate victim to an isolated island and let him enjoy the torment of the tides and whirlpools. He would usually try to identify who could not survive in the water for a long time and drag them far away before dealing with the rest of his opponents. He especially liked to extinguish flames, and he had a deep hatred for the fire elementals. Neptulin the Tidehunter was the ruler of water, lakes, rivers, and oceans. All water elementals and creatures that used water and cold as their main abilities would respect him. However, today, after 25,000 years, the saying, "a fallen phoenix is no better than a chicken," was used to describe Neptulin. Because he had died and revived once, his strength was no longer what it used to be. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how a mere sea monster could defeat him. In Warcraft, he was not even qualified to be the boss of a 5-man dungeon. From the fact that the final boss of the tidal throne was Azamat and not him, it was obvious how useless he was now. The great demigod of the weave, Duke Marcus. I, Neptulin, offer all my loyalty to you. From today onwards, your enemies are my enemies. My territory is your territory. It was good to talk to smart people. Stubbornly stubborn would only waste more effort. Smart spineless people were the easiest to subdue. Xueqi first turned his body into ice elementals, then opened a portal. In the next moment, Xueqi's figure appeared in the tidal throne in the deep sea. There was almost no light in the dark sea. However, with his elemental senses, Xueqi could clearly sense everything around him. Vasht immediately offered Xueqi a portion of the elements here. Chapter 1840. 1%, 10%, 30%, 51%. The elemental share was the control of the entire water elemental world. In a sense, controlling more than half of the elemental world was equivalent to controlling a super reservoir. As a ruler, he could control how much water was released. It was like fish in a dry swamp, or accumulating small amounts. An elemental world was a little different from a reservoir. It itself was like a huge nuclear reactor. The difference was that it did not flow out nuclear energy or electricity, but would continuously produce elements. This was why the elemental world overflowed with elements towards Azeroth and other planes since ancient times. Feeling that his soul touch had spread to more than half of the elemental world, including the tidal throne, when Xueqi absorbed 51% of the elemental share, he stopped. Master. Vasht was a little puzzled. Salagia, you take another 30%. Usually, I will give you an additional 10% of the usage. As for how you distribute it, that is your business. Yes. Vasht did as she was told. The eyes of Vasht's core subordinates all lit up. Unstable Hydus, Deepwater Lord Carathilas, Marogr Tidewalker, Yusler. They had followed Vasht for the longest 10,000 years, and the shortest was at least a few hundred years. What were they after? Wasn't it just more power, more territory, and more authority? Xueqi believed that Vasht could control this group of guys very well. Perhaps in time, there would be a few new water demigods born. Thanks to the fact that the ancient god Enzos did not directly intervene in the affairs of the water elemental world, the elemental share here could be said to be quite complete. When Vashj killed Urzamat, she found it very funny. Urzamat actually took 40% of the elemental share and beat Neptulin, who had 30% of the elemental share, like a dog. The remaining 10% was left for Neptulin, and Duke Hydas's share was raised to 9%. The share of the entire water elemental world was decided in this way. Perhaps some people would ask why Vashj, who only had a little elemental share in the water elemental world, would beat Urzamat up? That was because the total amount of elements that Vashj controlled was higher. In fact, the Azeroth main world and the elemental world were two separate entities. The elemental concentration in the elemental world was undoubtedly the highest. Although the concentration was high, the total amount was small. The Azeroth main plane's elemental concentration was low, but the total amount was many times greater. It was as if the entire land of fire had descended into the main plane and only occupied the small southern foothills of Mount Hyjal. The water elemental realm was about the same size, just the size of Valshi. That was why Ragnaros and Al-Akir dreamed of occupying all the fire and wind elements on the main plane. Although the elements realm was the source of elements, the absolute quantity of elements in the main plane could also consume the pure elements in the elements realm. This was why Duke had applied to planet Azeroth's will to make Vashj a demigod under the direct jurisdiction of the planet. Having managed Lord Emir Lake for so long, Vashj's cards were definitely better than Ozamat and Neptulin, who had torn apart the water elemental plane. For Duke and Vashj, controlling the water elemental realm was equivalent to controlling the entire Azeroth water element from the source to the branches. Although the total amount of water element on the entire planet was too shocking, far beyond the scope of a demigod's control, having both the branches and the source was unimaginable. When the water elemental realm was completely integrated with the main plane, it was foreseeable that the share of water element would become more and more valuable. The law of nature was that the winner took all. Neptulin could, of course, sense that his old rival Ragnaros was already dead. Facing Duke, the superboss who destroyed Lager, controlled the fire elemental realm, and dominated the powerful demigod Vashj, Neptulin did not dare to even fart. He had to be a coward. The water elemental realm had completely changed. From today onwards, Duke would be the ruler of this place, while Vashj would rule over the tidal throne as Duke's representative, controlling this place. Master, I still have something important to do. Please let me report to Karazhan, Vashj said very respectfully. Okay. After Vashj arranged the defense here, it was actually a territory for the 4 water element masters under her. Then, she and Duke returned to Karazhan through the portal. Although Vashj looked submissive on the outside, through the soul connection, Duke could clearly feel the excitement in her heart. Almost as soon as they stepped into the bedroom, Vashj turned back into the appearance of a high elf and wrapped around him like a beautiful snake. She clearly had a pair of long legs, but she gave Duke a soft and boneless feeling. Master. With a sickeningly sweet voice, Vashj displayed a kind of passion that did not match with a water element demigod. Duke unsheathed his godly sword, followed by sword drawing technique and sword return technique. The seemingly monotonous 2,888 consecutive stabs had an unimaginable fiery effect. In the end, Vashj, who overestimated herself and wanted to challenge Duke, ran out of stamina and was put to the ground, limp like mud. Duke raised his eyelids. This is your important matter? Nothing is more important than confirming Master's care for me. If Master doesn't trust me, then I will continue to be my personal maid. I don't want this water elemental realm. What Vashj said made sense, and Duke was speechless. This was the difference in the way people thought because of their different backgrounds. Vashj, who was born as a noble but had been a maid for Queen Azhara in the palace for a long time, still had the habit of relying on the royal power or the strong. That was something that could not be changed. Just like in the original history, Vashj, who was once independent, finally found Illidan, the unreliable doc, just because she felt that Illidan was stronger than her and that there was a better future with Illidan. So she died tragically in the Serpent Shrine Cavern. In this life, she saved her soul and saw Duke as the only salvation for her body and mind. So she became Duke. Duke's focus and desire were even above her personal wishes. Duke could not help but like this loyal dog-like attribute brought about by changing history. It was so worry-free. After being intimate with Vashj for an entire day and night, Duke suddenly received an unexpected visitor. Kale, that Sunstrider. Oh, what a rare guest. I didn't expect you to visit me. This was not a polite remark. Although Xueqi had helped Kale back then, and Kale was very grateful to Xueqi, for the sake of his subordinates, Kale had to create a small circle independent of the Alliance's power circle. This group of people was under orders from the Alliance, but also a bit like an organization like Silver Dawn, with a certain degree of independence. Chapter 1841. For the sake of that group of people, and not wanting to provoke the Windrunner family, which held the power of the Blood Elves, Kale, that's relationship with Xueqi was always a little ambiguous. Kaisi would accept any of Xueqi's arrangements or orders, but he rarely came to find Xueqi in private. Kale that's glanced at Vashj, who was standing beside Xueqi and dressed like a maid, with a dignified bearing and lustful eyes. He seemed to be a little concerned, but he also seemed to be used to it. His reaction was a little strange. What? I've already reported Vashj's attack on the water elemental realm at the throne meeting. Xueqi found it strange. Kaisi sighed. No, I'm just a little envious of the trust between you two, master and servant. In the past, in the circle of high elven nobles, even husband and wife would have all kinds of dirty political deals or frame each other. Xueqi did not know how to continue the topic. Instead, it was Vashj who blushed, which was rare. Kaisi changed the topic, stood up, and bowed deeply to Xueqi. When he looked up, he said in a straightforward manner, Xueqi, I'll also say it directly. I hope to offer my soul and loyalty to you. This. Needless to say, Xueqi was a little stunned. He wanted to say, you must be joking, right? But he immediately realized that Kaisi was unusually serious. What's wrong with Kaisi? Kale that's continued. I spent the first half of my life as a prince. I used to think that seeking happiness for my compatriots and people was the whole meaning of my life. I've always encouraged myself with this. Unfortunately, my father's matter completely turned my world upside down. Xueqi did not say anything and let Kaisi continue. That was my father's sin, and also the sin of the Sunstrider surname. Since I'm a member of the Sunstrider, I don't regret it, nor do I blame my father. I calmly accepted this sin. I worked hard for a long time, hoping to still do something for my compatriots after removing the Sunstrider surname. Unfortunately, I discovered that Sylvanas Windrunner did a better job than I did. At this point, Kaisi sighed deeply. I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss for myself. I'm at a loss for those who believe in me and want to follow me to the death. We don't know where our future lies. Xueqi interrupted. You have already proved your determination and courage to fight against evil with your actions. Have you forgotten the cheers of the Blood Elves? Of course not. But we want to do more, not just for the Blood Elves, but also for this world that is constantly being invaded by evil. Because of this, my followers and I yearn for greater power. Xueqi frowned. You can't find your own path to power? Kale that's became agitated, and his voice became more sonorous. No, I found it. But this is the only path that suits me, and it requires your absolute trust. Xueqi realized what Kaisi was referring to. Vashj, who was beside Xueqi, also had a fierce look in her eyes. As long as Xueqi gave her a look, she would not hesitate to attack Kale that's. Xueqi sat comfortably on the sofa and lay back down. His voice was a little unfathomable. You want the share of the fire elemental world that I control? I know it's shameless of me to make such a request as an outsider, but I don't have a better way, and I believe that this can solve the problem of my followers having similar symptoms of magic addiction in the future. So in exchange, my followers and I are willing to offer you all our souls. At this point, Kale that's no longer bowed, but knelt down deeply to worship Xueqi. It had to be said that Kale that's was very accurate in this matter. Unlike in the fire elemental world, Xueqi did not have a capable assistant like Vashj in the fire elemental world. So Xueqi only symbolically gave Majordomo 5% and made him a manager. As for the other two guys, Sharnox, the fire demon hunter who had joined Xueqi in advance, gave him 3%. As for Modron, who would have become the fire elemental lord because he had chosen the tall among the short in history, that was too bad. I'll give you 1%. Take it or leave it. Xueqi monopolized 91% of the shares and was in an absolute position of dominance. Xueqi's ambition was not just the fire elemental world. He had to at least take care of the arcane, fire, and frost elements to become a true god. He could not have so much energy to concentrate on managing the fire elemental world. It should be said that Majordomo was enough to manage it. The problem was that Majordomo was too weak. Even if he became a demigod, His combat power was still as high as 5 among demigods. Xueqi's real representative in the fire elemental world should be like Vashj, who could fight and had his deep trust. That was ideal. That's proposal scratched his itch. After all, at the end of the day, Xueqi could not absolutely trust Majordomo. That guy was forced to surrender by Xueqi. Since he could surrender to Xueqi, there was no guarantee that he could surrender to other powerhouses in the future. In this life, Kai did not fall into a state of madness because of his clansmen. His pure heart was still worthy of praise. There was no need to say who the balance in his heart was leaning towards. Xueqi crossed his fingers and placed them on his knees. He pretended to think for a while before nodding in agreement. I agree. There are many people who are willing to offer their souls to me in exchange for power, but not many of them have character and will that I recognize. You happen to be one of the few, so I agree. That's kowtowed heavily and said loudly, "Thank you, Master. I'll go and call my followers over to pay their respects to the Master." A few minutes later, Kai brought a group of subordinates and filled Xueqi's reception room. "Greetings, Master," dozens of elves said in unison. Xueqi had to admit that that was quite popular. In addition, the nobles of the mages were quite unhappy with the power of the once lowly ranger faction. Not every mage who had lived for thousands of years and was used to being a big shot could condescend to be ordered around by the ranger faction. Therefore, a large number of mages joined that's. With the help of the weave, just Kai's subordinates alone could form a new Silver Moon Council. From now on, Master will only have the great weave demigod Duke Marcus. I, that's Sunstrida, am just one of Master's servants. Everyone, please recognize your new identities. Kai instructed. Yes. Dozens of people answered in unison. Kai turned to Xueqi. Master, you can choose any one of them to be your guard or maid. Back then, Kai had given Xueqi an astromancer, Solarian. It was unknown if he was addicted to giving them away, or if the high elves had the habit of giving girls away. In any case, Xueqi was still a little uncomfortable. Chapter 1842. It felt like a dynasty before the Celestial Empire, where it was normal for rich families to give their concubines away. Interestingly, the moment Kai said this, one of the 4 heavenly kings beside him, the astrologer Caponia, became anxious. She stared at Kai anxiously, and then felt that it was inappropriate, so she secretly tugged on Kai sleeve. Kai seemed to have come to his senses and wanted to change his words, but he did not dare to open his mouth and slap himself in the face. Xueqi wanted to laugh at the sight of the young couple. Xueqi looked like he was about to snatch someone's wife. All right, I think Caponia is not bad. When Xueqi said Caponia's name, Kai and Caponia felt completely disheartened, as if there was nothing left for them to live for. Kai immediately reacted. Back then, because he lacked courage, he had knelt in front of his great lich father, who had sought refuge with the Calamity Army. This time, he was not going to be timid anymore. He was going to say, "No," loudly. Without paying attention to the second half of Duke's words, Kai's body suddenly burst into flames and his whole body jumped up. Yes, he really jumped up. He was at least 5 to 6 centimeters off the ground. Wait, no. Caponia can't do it. When Kai roared out loud, he felt as if a great river had burst its banks, and he could finally vent all the depression in his heart. Boo-hoo. I did it. Caponia, I did it. Although I might not be able to step into the demigod realm for the rest of my life, at least I'm safe. Something's wrong. Kai was already prepared to face Xueqi's thunderous rage. After all, he was the one who went back on his word. But why was Xueqi smiling evilly, his blood elf followers shocked, and Caponia a little angry? That was dumbfounded. Xueqi leaned against the back of the sofa in satisfaction. He waved his hand, and Vashj came over to massage his back. Dumuk repeated his words with a poisonous tongue that was bubbling up. Hey, that's. What do you mean by that? Just now I said, I think Caponia is not bad. Why don't I bestow her as your wife? Then you actually said, wait. No, not Caponia. Are you saying that you don't like Caponia and want to offer her to me as a maid to warm my bed? No, of course not. Actually, I like Caponia. Kai finally admitted shamefully. Xueqi's explanation of the cause and effect was so infuriating that several guys, including the 4 heavenly kings, were already snickering. At this time, how could Kai Z not know that he was played by Xueqi? He thought that Xueqi, who was obsessed with elves, wouldn't die so easily and would let Caponia go. Subconsciously, he thought that his little lover had been sent away because of his slip of the tongue. In the end, he was the one who fell into Xueqi's trap. Kai Z's face immediately turned red, and he scratched his head in distress, not knowing what to say. But now that he had said it, Kyle felt a sense of relief. Okay, tell me, how did you get together with her? Since his master had given the order, even if it was a little embarrassing, Kai Z could only confess. Kai Z and Caponia's relationship seemed to be a natural one. Ever since Kai Z became a great traitor to the elves, his 4 advisors had never abandoned him. He didn't have many capable female mages around him. Originally, there was the great astrologer Solarian. In order to help Kai Z out, Solarian had volunteered to serve Xueqi. In a sense, this was also an opportunity. Xueqi had more or less put in more effort to help Kai Z wash away the stigma of being a traitor. But this way, Kai Z would only be left with Caponia. It was easy to feel lonely away from home. In the long night, if he wasn't looking for someone to talk to, he would sink into loneliness. Back then, the 4 advisors were naturally the ones that Kai Z talked to the most. Was it easier to talk to a few men, or was it easier to talk to a girl who was kind and understanding? As time went by, Caponia succeeded in getting the position. To be honest, if Duke was given a choice, when he first arrived in Azeroth, he would probably choose the elves. Even Caponia might not be the best choice. Since he already had the famous 3 Windrunner sisters, why would he need other high elves? Just having the 3 Windrunner sisters was equivalent to having all the girls in the high elves. Not to mention Caponia, even Xueqi hadn't touched Solarian, who was a maid. Dumok wasn't a stud, so why would he lower himself to F***ck a girl who was a level lower? So, not only did Xueqi bless Kai Z and Caponia, he also gave Kai Z a 10% share of the Land of Fire elements. Here's your AO. I think the surrounding environment will be very suitable for you and your phoenix. Xueqi opened the 3D map of the Land of Fire and seemed to have given Kai Z a piece of land. Kai Z didn't see it at first, but when he saw it clearly, he immediately thanked him profusely. How could that place not be suitable? It turned out that it was the territory of Alyssa Razor, who had betrayed the alliance and turned from a green dragon to a fire hawk. As a place to cultivate a pure-blooded fire hawk, it was also quite suitable to cultivate a phoenix. It could be foreseen that as long as Kai Z displayed his talent and completely combined his power with his phoenixes, he would soon become a demigod of fire. After sending Kai Z and the others away, Xueqi returned to the study and began to think while enjoying Vash's verbal service. He thought that he should have accumulated enough capital to embark on the path of a true mage god after obtaining the control of all the elements in the water and fire elemental realms. The reason why Xueqi gave out his share so generously was that Xueqi had determined through the system elf that even if he took out 100% of the elements, including all the ice and fire elements in the elemental realm and the entire Azeroth, it still wouldn't be enough. To be specific, it wasn't a problem of quantity, but a serious lack of quality. What was annoying was that this was like a puzzle. If one piece was missing, he could still find out which piece was missing. But now, it felt like at least half of it was missing. The rest that could be judged was like broken glass, all in strange shapes that people couldn't make heads or tails of. Sigh. At this time, a comfortable feeling came. After a while, Vashj raised her head. Master, what are you thinking about? Nothing, I'm just thinking about how I can become a true god. Everyone has improved, but I've been stuck at demigod for so long. Vashj laughed. How could it be so easy? Before the ancient war, the white deer god Malorn had been stuck at the demigod realm for tens of thousands of years, but he still couldn't ascend. Let nature take its course. Xueqi was stunned. He thought about it and agreed. This kind of thing couldn't be rushed or forced. Then let nature take its course. Chapter 1843. Xueqi looked into the distance. With the help of the magician's eyes, he could see the situation near Oldham thousands of miles away. Savannah's was a very proud man deep down in his bones. Without Xueqi, perhaps she would still be an arrogant elf in this life even if she did not become the undead queen. It was because she was venting her dissatisfaction at Xueqi while blowing Xueqi's pillow talk that Xueqi could not do anything to her. When you peek at my battle, it makes me feel that you don't trust me. If you stay in the shadow behind me every time, ready to support me at any time, it will make me feel very useless. Before leaving to fight against Ao Trash, Queen Sylvanas said this to Xueqi in a half-complaining tone. Xueqi really could not do anything to Queen Sylvanas. Some women were willing to give up everything without reservation. Some women always wanted to keep their own territory, so that they could have a breathing space. Queen Sylvanas' independence and the pride that appeared from time to time was more like her trademark, even to the extent that it was already a part of her soul. Sometimes she would bring trouble to Xueqi, and sometimes she would surprise Xueqi. This always made Xueqi love and hate. Xueqi did not dare to directly look into the wind god's throne. Unlike the great screw Laga, who only realized that the enemy was right in front of him, whether it was Ao Trash or Queen Sylvanas, those who played with the wind element were extremely sensitive. As long as Xueqi dared to inject his arcane elements into the wind god's throne, the two big bosses would definitely find out immediately. It was fine if Al-Akir found out. Anyway, Xueqi did not intend to let this guy live, but Queen Sylvanas. If he did not handle it well, there would be turmoil in the harem. Speaking of which, Queen Sylvanas was pregnant with Xueqi's child. A pregnant mother could not be provoked. Xueqi could only bitterly use the most secretive method to set up a batch of passive sensing tactics for the wind element. There was no way. Xueqi did no magic of the 6 major elements, but among the 3 elements of nature, holy, and shadow, Xueqi was the weakest in nature. Not to mention that the nature element included wind, thunder, and other branches. In front of the real demigod of wind, he was just an amateur. Fortunately, Xueqi also had his own unique skills. He could roughly judge the current situation of the battle based on the flow and proportion of the wind elements. Oh, we've already passed the Wind Council? Xueqi was a little surprised. The Wind Council was one of the 4 heavenly kings under Al-Akir. As the Lord of South Wind, Siamat, was imprisoned by the Nephesite, one of the 3 major tribes of Oldham, Al-Akir's deputies eagerly wanted to fill the power vacuum that appeared in the Wind Council. The remaining 3 members of the council were Anshul, the Lord of West Wind, who could heal his allies or poison his enemies with wind; Lo-Ash, the Lord of East Wind, who could grind the grandest mountains into dust with his wind; and Nishil, the Lord of North Wind, who had lost more lives than the other 3 combined. Doesn't it sound like the 3 counselors are pretty awesome? In reality, that was all there was to it. After all, the equipment dropped by the Wind Council was not that great. When Xueqi was still a player, the so-called random enchantment that dropped equipment caused many of his team members to bleed profusely. What really deserved Xueqi's attention was the change in the proportion of the wind elements. Xueqi sensitively discovered that the proportion of elements in the wind elemental realm had changed. In addition to Queen Sylvanas, who had already interfered, there were 2 more share controllers. They had a very similar but different aura to Queen Sylvanas. Xueqi almost immediately recognized that it was the aura of Aurelia and Sasha. Xueqi's heart leaped with joy. Territories needed to be managed, and blindly plundering and squeezing was not advisable. Obtaining enough elements also meant paying the corresponding responsibility. Just like how Xueqi chose Vashj as the representative of the water elemental realm and made Kaisi a trusted aide of the fire elemental realm. In the end, Queen Sylvanas still chose her sisters as her deputies. Of course, this made Xueqi feel gratified. At the same time, it also meant that Aurelia and Sasha also had the ability to hurt Al-Akir. Feeling the intense and frenzied movement of the wind elements, Xueqi could totally imagine how fierce the battle in the wind god's throne was. In fact, it was just as Xueqi imagined. After beating up the 3 idiots of the Wind Council, Queen Sylvanas used a small trick to deceive Al-Akir and did not immediately discover that the council was completely annihilated. This allowed Queen Sylvanas to recuperate and let her sisters come over to absorb the power and element share of the 2 wind lords. When the 3 sisters were done, Al-Akir, who felt that something was wrong, appeared. His figure was similar to Ragnaros's. The huge amount of elements in his body made him extremely huge. His height alone was more than 10 stories high. The length and volume of his lower body were immeasurable because his lower body was a few layers of tornadoes that rotated clockwise or counterclockwise. The decoration on his upper body was a little ridiculous. Al-Akir had a purple bun that looked like a Hindustani. The purple bandage-like band covered almost his entire face. Only 2 flashing purple lights could be seen, which could be considered his eyes. The main parts of his body were covered with thick platinum armor. On the left and right shoulder plates, there were 2 flashing electric balls that emitted the power of violent thunder suspended in the air. Wrapped in purple silk ribbons with gold edges was a pair of pure wind elemental arms. Seeing Queen Sylvanas and her sisters, Al-Akir raised his arms angrily. Greedy and shameless mortals, not only do you want to step into the divine realm, but you also covet my throne and my power? Queen Sylvanas responded with contempt. Ha ha! You dare to collude with Enzoth in order to obtain the rule of the entire Azeroth. Have you never thought that there would be a day when you would be counterattacked? I really admire your naivety. If the word naivety was used to describe a little girl, it would be a compliment. To describe a lord of elements who had lived for tens of thousands of years, it would be utter contempt. Queen Sylvanas easily provoked Al-Akir's anger. The wind element was not a good-tempered fellow. Al-Akir was not as irascible as Saga, but he was not far behind. Al-Akir would not be nice to a thief like Queen Sylvanas who wanted to seize the throne. Queen, let me help you. Gavinrad waved his wind sword and slashed at Al-Akir. Al-Akir suddenly flew into a rage. Son? Bastard human. Shameless human. How dare you use my son's power to attack me? Gust of wind. At first, Gavinrad did not understand why Al-Akir suddenly changed his target when he wanted to kill Queen Sylvanas first. But when he heard Al-Akir's angry roar, he realized that he was the one who caused trouble. Chapter 1844. Gavinrad had been playing with the wind sword for a long time. It was so long ago that Kiran had forgotten that Thunder Wrath, Windseeker's blessed sword, actually sealed Prince Thunderan's soul inside the sword and kept extracting the prince's power, hence the special effect of the wind sword. It wasn't his fault that he had forgotten. After all, this was one of the earliest divine weapons of the Alliance of Heroes. Who was Prince Thunderan? Wasn't it just Al-Akir's son? Using the power of his son's smash to slash his father didn't need to say anything. Gavinrad, who had never had enough aggro and was often not a good MT, pulled the aggro very well this time. What? Defensive knights were only good at pulling group monsters and not tanking the boss because they didn't have enough aggro? That was impossible. At least not this time. At this moment, whether it was the bitter comrade Gavinrad or Sylvanas, they both understood Dumuk's sinister intentions. Duque had promised not to interfere with Queen Sylvanas' threats and promises. Now it seemed that he wasn't just interfering. He was practically sticking his hands and feet into it. As a demigod of wind, Queen Sylvanas's physical attributes weren't greatly enhanced, at least in terms of vitality. Compared to her speed, magic, and attack power, her vitality wasn't even worth mentioning. It could be said that if Queen Sylvanas was hit hard by Al-Akir, she might not die, but Duque's unborn child might be finished. In a life-and-death battle of this level, how could Queen Sylvanas reduce her chances of getting hurt to zero? This wasn't a game where there was a main tank and defensive warrior to take most of the damage from the boss. In reality, bosses weren't stupid. They all had brains and wouldn't be affected by aggro pulling skills like taunt or armor break. The boss would attack someone purely because they were a greater threat to him. Of course, there was one exception, and that was the true meaning of ridicule. Queen Sylvanas was here to seize power, so she would at most be considered an attempted crime. What about Gavinrad? He had witnesses and material evidence and could be directly convicted. Every bit of power in the wind sword in his hand came from the soul of Prince Thunderan, who was sealed in the sword. The prince's soul led the gathering of wind elements, which resulted in the wind sword's special effect. It could be said that every time Gavinrad swung the wind sword, it was as if the prince's soul was wailing. The whispers in other people's ears became terrible lines in Al-Akir's ears. The following content is purely a free translation of the distorted version. If there are any similarities, it is purely coincidental. Yamit. Papa, save me. So painful, sob sob sob. These voices sounded like they had been smashed by a grass mud horse 10,000 times, so Gavinrad was completely enraged. A powerful move sent Gavinrad flying into the sky. Well, it was like a home run, flying out in one go. Above his head was a boundless azure sky. Beneath his feet was a boundless blue ocean. Gavinrad wasn't skydiving, he was skydiving. Gavinrad had never been afraid of anyone. Even if the two commanders of the Burning Legion were here, he would still dare to fight back. The premise was to keep his feet firmly planted on the ground. Had this guy ever been sent flying into the air and then completely freefall? Wah! Gavinrad was so scared that he almost *T himself. Help! I'm going to die. Not only that, Al-Akir's hatred was not appeased. His huge wind elemental hands pushed out continuously. Ha! 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 It was a continuous stream of lightning arrows that were like Gatling guns. Streaks of long lightning radiance really looked like the tracer bullets of a machine gun, drawing out dazzling arcs of light in the bright sky. This was the aura that Gavin Rad wouldn't stop until he was beaten to a pulp. Paladins were supposed to be a symbol of courage. Seeing this guy dancing and screaming, Queen Sylvanas was both amused and annoyed. She waved her hand, and the wind element that belonged to her instantly rolled out. Gavin Rad felt like he was riding on the clouds. He made a big circle and actually flew back to the platform of the Wind God throne. With the support of the demigod of wind, Queen Sylvanas, Gavin Rad, who did not learn from his mistakes, shouted, "Let me tell you, this Thunder's Fury, blessed sword of the Wind Seeker, represents Prince Thunderan's blessing to me. Bull**T. Al-Trash was enraged again. This time, it was the ice storm. That was like a Category 12 hurricane. The violent tornado swept up thousands of white clouds and gathered an extreme chill. It crashed violently into Gavin Rad, the enemy who killed his son. F***CK%yen #at. Before Gavin Rad could finish cursing, he was sent flying again. Air was the medium for transmitting sound. If the air became an irregular turbulence, then the transmission of sound would be impossible. The second half of Gavin Rad's curse was eaten up by the ice storm. Queen Sylvanas and Gavin Rad weren't the only ones who came to attack Al-Akir. The others held back their laughter and attacked Al-Akir, who didn't care about anything. This was especially so for Aurelia and Sasha. Every arrow that the sisters shot out would leave holes of various sizes on Al-Akir's body. If Al-Trash was a human, they would have shot out bloody holes one after another on his body. It could be said that because Al-Akir attacked Gavin Rad crazily, everyone had a stable environment to attack and output. This time, Gavin Rad, who was sent flying, became a large ice block the size of a wardrobe. Through the bumpy surface of the ice, he could see that this guy had been sent flying with his arms and legs wide open. But in the next second, the ice block was crushed by Queen Sylvanas with a gust of wind. Gavin Rad, whose lips were purple from the cold, was sent back by the wind. Gavin Rad was furious too. He raised his wind sword and shouted, "Ha ha! Gavin Rad, am back. Al-Akir, let me tell you, I am the unkillable cockroach that Duque mentioned. Although I don't know what a cockroach is." Before he could finish his words, he was sent flying again. No wind, no ice. This time, it was lightning. Aura, 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 aura. The violent lightning strike was launched from Al-Trash's hands. Even though Gavin Rad had activated Holy Shield, the powerful natural elemental attack still broke through his Holy Light Shield. If it wasn't for Sally Whitemane's powerful healing spell at the last moment, he might have already died. Even so, there was still an unknown object that looked like a burnt corn or a dark paladin flying through the sky. Queen Sylvanas. I'll call you Queen Sylvanas just like Duque. Can we make a deal? Don't send me back. Gavin Rad was about to cry. Sylvanas said seriously, "Wind's return." A minute later. No. I admit defeat. Please don't send me back. Wind return. I'm really going to die. A certain paladin was furious. Wind return. Chapter 1845. Anger was a double-edged sword. It could give people strength and explosive power, but it could also make people lose their rationality and judgment. Al-Akir was not human, but he also had emotions, and that was enough. Gavin Rad was the poisonous bait that Duque had set up to feed to Al-Trash. Regardless of whether Al-Trash ate this poisonous bait, it would greatly distract him. Unless it was an existence without emotions, as long as it was an intelligent creature, it would be difficult for it to remain indifferent to the enemy who killed its children. Holy Knights were famous for being able to fight and take damage. Even though Gavin Rad seemed a little weak. As one of the remaining 5 Silver Saints, he had escaped the shackles of fate and escaped the fate of death from Arthas. After going through so many battles, his vitality and endurance were infinitely close to the demigod realm. With the support of so many healers, and the storm armor that Queen Sylvanas secretly gave him, it was difficult for him to die even if he wanted to. It was just a little hard for him to keep getting beaten up. In fact, when Al-Akir chased after him, he had already accepted his fate. It was just that he would not feel good if he did not curse out loud. When Al-Akir woke up from his anger, it was already a little too late. The attackers led by the three Windrunner sisters and the Storm Warden Amaran took advantage of the time when he was beating Gavin Rad to quietly deplete 75% of his wind element. Elemental creatures did not have a specific pain system. Only damage that directly pierced the soul would cause them to be alert. However, the high-purity wind element that belonged to Al-Akir was actually his life force. With 3/4 of his life force gone, Al-Akir finally woke up. "You treacherous thieves! Wild wind! Listen to my command. Go with the wind, little bugs." Following Al-Akir's domineering declaration, an unprecedented storm swept through the sky. It was a terrifying storm that could cut rocks into pieces and pulverize bricks into gravel. Not only was there frost, but there was also terrifying lightning that danced like snakes. Amaran created a tornado that was independent of Al-Akir's power to protect everyone. The people were saved, but the platform that carried the Wind Council's Wind Lords suddenly collapsed. Ah! Many Alliance heroes screamed. Especially heroines. It was easy to feel weak if one's feet were not firmly planted on the ground. The sudden feeling of weightlessness was torturous. For example, Sally was the one who shouted the loudest. From the Molten Core until now, Sally was an old member of the Alliance's hero squad. From a little girl to a slender and elegant young lady, Sally could be said to be a veteran. Unfortunately, some things just couldn't get used to, so she was the one who screamed the loudest. "Miss Sally, please stop screaming." Hajaron Mingi couldn't take it anymore. "In theory, Her Majesty the Windrunner Queen will save us soon. Of course, I have the slow fall spell. Why, is Miss Whitemane going to become a mage?" Millhouse made a suggestion that was out of place. In fact, in the next second, Queen Sylvanas shouted. The eye of the storm. The stones that were supposed to fall rapidly due to gravity began to spin strangely in the air, trembling. Some of the tiny gravel even flew higher into the sky in defiance of gravity. Every mortal who was falling suddenly felt that there was something under their feet. With just a thought, the wind around their bodies all listened to their commands, moving them up, down, left, right, back and forth. Everyone, including Stormwatcher Amaran, realized that they could actually fly, and their speed was 300% of their normal movement speed. "This is the eye of the storm?" Amaran was a little shocked. "Haha, I can fly." Riadaline was very happy. "That's amazing." Solon and Leander were in awe. If not for the fact that they were facing a strong enemy, everyone would definitely enjoy the feeling of flying freely. "Gavin Rad, where are you going?" "I suddenly remembered that I have something urgent to do," a certain paladin said with a sobbing voice. Queen Sylvanas smirked, and with a wave of her hand, she grabbed Mr. Gavin Rad, who was trying to slip away and fly as far as he could. In fact, Queen Sylvanas' actions were a little redundant. Audiobook, who had woken up, was already suppressing his own unhappiness. He ignored the little bug Gavin Rad and focused on dealing with her. Only Queen Sylvanas could shake the source of his power. Lightning, lightning wand, lightning cloud, static shock. Audiobook used a series of lightning attacks from the wind elemental branch to beat the hero team into a sorry state. The attack speed of lightning was faster than the wind, and it was also harder to defend against. In order to avoid injury, Queen Sylvanas had to focus more and summon lightning to intercept Audiobook's lightning. Unknowingly, it had become a battle of attrition. As an attacker fighting in the enemy's formation, this was quite disadvantageous to Queen Sylvanas. After all, in the Wind God's throne, there were more wind elementals that listened to Audiobook's orders. If this continued, Queen Sylvanas would not be able to outlast Audiobook. At this time, Aurelia and Sasha stepped forward. It had to be said that the female elf's thinking was a little strange. Before they had children, they always wanted to have a child. Therefore, the two sisters were not willing to risk their lives until the last moment. But after giving birth, the two sisters were even fiercer than the fiercest Queen Sylvanas. At this moment, they completely let go of their souls and forcefully plundered the share of the wind elemental here. They did not even let go of Queen Sylvanas' share. If it were someone else, Queen Sylvanas might have turned hostile. Sisters were sisters, and there was nothing that they could not share. Seeing that she could not attack, Queen Sylvanas decisively gave up most of her wind elemental and transferred it to her sisters. In an instant, the situation of the battle changed. It felt as if there were 4 demigods surrounding and attacking Audiobook. It suddenly became Queen Sylvanas defending, while Aurelia, Sasha, and Amalron were attacking. This kind of chaotic attack made Audiobook at a loss. He was furious. He roared. He kept summoning wind, rain, thunder, and lightning to attack his enemies in various forms. But he was the best example of two fists being unable to fight against four hands. The wind elemental that had gathered on his body was rapidly being sliced off inch by inch. It was a high-speed nibbling that could be seen with the naked eye. When the two dazzling balls of lightning on his shoulder armor became dim, the great lord of the wind elemental world, Audiobook, was dead. Feeling the elemental authority surging toward her from all directions in the wind elemental world, Queen Sylvanas was overflowing with dominance and waved her hand. Everyone realized that many black spots were rising under their feet. Countless stone fragments that had fallen not long ago were rising against gravity. Thousands of stones gathered together, forming a huge floating island with a diameter of nearly 1 kilometer. Queen Sylvanas stood in the center of the floating island and announced loudly, "I announce, I, Sylvanas Windrunner, am the new lord of the wind elemental world." Chapter 1846. The voice of the elemental world attached to Azeroth could only be heard by the elemental world and elemental creatures in the same situation. For example, the various large and small elemental creatures in the land of fire and tidal throne that had been subdued. From Vashj and Kael, that's who stood at the top of the elemental world, to the second brothers like Major Domo and Caratheras, to the pitiful Smoldrin and Neptulin who could have been big bosses but were now just third brothers, and to the elemental creatures of various levels. Those who were truly ambitious had all kinds of thoughts. Neptulin and Smoldrin, who originally had some thoughts, immediately gave up on the rebellious thoughts. The situation was very clear now. Duke Marcus was aiming for the position of the Lord of the Four Elements. The fire, water, and wind realms were all under Duke's control. Then, needless to say, it was the Earth elemental world's turn. Not long ago, when Neptulin saw the fire and wind realms enter Azeroth first, he was prepared to wait and see. Now, it seemed like he was simply sending himself to his death. In addition, the powerhouses closely related to the elements could also receive the news. The Guardians of Mount Hyjal and the Ring of the Earth, which were dedicated to quelling the anger of the elements, were all dumbfounded. Especially the Ring of the Earth. Originally, Hamuer and the others were still holding meetings day and night to discuss how to coax the various elemental masters so that they would not come out to cause trouble and return to their respective elemental worlds. Great. Now they're all fucking traitors jumping over loyal officials. As long as the three elemental world masters gave an order, it would immediately turn into the three elemental worlds ganging up on the Earth elemental world. The druids in the Ring of the Earth suddenly felt as if they had learned the way of nature for nothing. They were learning harmony and communication. On the other side, Duke was taking the way of the king. He directly used his fists to get rid of the troublemakers and subdue the troublemakers. When he became the boss, all the turmoil would be quelled. To put it more exaggeratedly, if Duke wanted to play a specific game, he could give a strict order. Other than the local neutral elemental creatures in Azeroth, the shamans would not be able to use any water, fire, or wind elements. There were no shamans in the alliance. When the news spread that Queen Sindorii conquered the Wind God throne and became the queen of the wind elemental world, the whole kingdom of Sindorii rejoiced. Almost all the elves ran to the streets to celebrate, singing and dancing. It didn't matter if Queen Sylvanas was Duke's wife or not. In any case, not only did Queen Sylvanas become a semi-god, she had also become the queen of an entire world. Even the mage faction in the country had begun to discuss whether or not they should develop wind magic on a large scale. After all, their queen was practically the goddess of wind. It would be a waste not to use such a good resource. The alliance's Duke controlled the water and fire elemental realms, appointed Kael, Thats and Vashj as overseers, while Sylvanas controlled the wind elemental realm. Even though Die-Hard Roar had a big heart, he still felt that it was a little unbearable. It was true that the beast men played the berserker style, but while they revered the warrior class, the shaman's teachings were the true tradition. Shaman priests were not only respected professionals, but also the core of the tribe's military. Earth, water, fire and wind. These four elements would be hard to bear, not to mention losing three of them at once. Without the water element, there would be no healing magic. Without fire, there would be no AoE attacks. Without wind. Just think about it, the legendary Wind Fury 9 consecutive strikes of the earliest shamans. Without wind, there would be no use. Once the shaman profession went up against the alliance, it would immediately be useless. Die-Hard Roar fell into a rare long silence. On the other side, Xueqi had rushed to New Silver Moon City to welcome the triumphant return of Queen Sylvanas and her party as half a master. Before he could hug his 3 lovers for a long time, Gavin Rad rushed out like lightning and hugged Xueqi tightly. Xueqi's eyes were filled with the charred armor that this guy was wearing. Xueqi, I'm going to die. I don't want to live anymore. Back then, I blocked a knife for you, I withstood Lager's hammer for you, and now I've withstood 100 lightning strikes for your fiancé. My life is so bitter. Sob, sob, sob. I'm old. Maybe I won't make it soon. It would be strange if I really can't carry the leader. It was worth mentioning that Gavin Rad's acting was terrible. After howling for a long time, he couldn't even bear to use a few drops of eye drops. It was just a few lines over and over again. What he meant was, I've shed blood and tears for you, Boss Xueqi. Don't call me when you're fighting bosses in the future, and remember to call me when you're picking up cheap loot. Xueqi's facial muscles were stiff. He pretended to comfort Gavin Rad. Why don't I let you retire with honor like Mograine? I'll convince your wife to accept your women and illegitimate children outside. For my sake, your wife won't say anything. Gavin Rad's face instantly turned pale. He immediately stood up and thumped his chest armor. He decisively expressed his loyalty. Actually, I'm not even 50 yet. I think I can still fight for another 15 years. That was what he said, but his sorrowful eyes gave Xueqi goosebumps. Queen Sylvanas's cold voice came from behind him. The wind elemental realm will give you 1%. Gavin Rad immediately continued to howl. Boss, I've shed blood for you. 3%. Forget it if you don't want it. Her Majesty Sylvanas finally gave her verdict. I suddenly remembered that I have other important things to do. I won't stand in the way of your reunion, boss. Gavin Rad, who had gotten the benefits, left immediately. Queen Sylvanas was indifferent, but she actually uttered a classic line. Men. She flicked her long blonde hair gently. That disdainful look, that aura with its own background music, that arrogant demeanor, she was simply invincible. Did she become arrogant after taking control of the wind elemental realm? Xueqi bared his teeth, a little depressed. He had suppressed Queen Sylvanas a while ago. Why did she seem to be gaining momentum recently? In any case, he was the father of the child in her belly, and he was her public fiancé. It wasn't too much to give her a public hug, right? Faced with Xueqi, who opened his arms, Queen Sylvanas still hugged him. It was a warm hug as usual, but she whispered in Xueqi's ear, I'm angry. You put Gavin Rad in my team because you don't believe in my ability. Well, I really... Humph. Forget it. Since you're going to be a father, you're so worried about us. I'll let you pass this time. After that, Queen Sylvanas secretly breathed in Xueqi's ear. Tonight from behind. Wow. That's a lot of information. You already know it's a daughter? Why is it a daughter again? By the way, are all demigods so awesome? You already know now? And from behind. Xueqi snickered. Chapter 1847. As the saying goes, a daughter is a father's lover in his previous life. A good daughter is very considerate. She might even say, I don't want to get married, I want to stay with my father forever. It's sweet to think about it. Son. Damn you. You'll know what differential treatment is when you have a son. If you accidentally press on a woman's hair, she'll yell at you. When that fat boy is born, he'll snatch away your special dumpling. His mother won't say anything even if he pulls and bites you. If you talk louder and disturb the son, you'll be sentenced to death. No matter how much trouble the son makes, he'll be acquitted. He'll say, if you run away, there'll be a man in the future. According to Queen Sylvanas's character, she'll cut you with a knife the next moment. It's definitely a good thing that she's pregnant. In the future, she'll inherit her mother's beauty, just like Aurelia and Sasha's daughter. Just like Annihilus and Atlanta, they'll definitely be as beautiful as their mother when they grow up. In theory they have different surnames. But are they the new Windrunner sisters? That night, Xueqi was a little annoyed. In the past, when he caught Queen Sylvanas, he'd occasionally say, if you're so awesome, why don't you go to heaven? Well, this time, Queen Sylvanas was ready. She even had an oars pose. Just as Xueqi was about to swing his sword and mount her, she really flew. She stuck to the ceiling of the bedroom and refused to come down. What do you mean by flying above my head? Duque was angry. I'm scared. The fearless Queen Sylvanas actually had this kind of moment. This time, it was Duque's turn to be annoyed. If Aurelia and Sasha hadn't become traitors and flown up to the bedroom to catch Queen Sylvanas, he didn't know what would have happened. After half a night, the three Windrunner sisters were finally dealt with. Facing Queen Sylvanas, who was pretending to be a corpse, Duque punched her but hard. I shouldn't have spoiled you so much and let you be the demigod of wind. Now you're making trouble for me. Queen Sylvanas couldn't keep up the act and turned around. Then what do you want? Take back my demigod status? No, I'm just asking, when will your pursuit of power end? Duque's question made Sylvanas stare blankly for a moment, and then a little discouraged. I actually didn't think about it. All right, I admit that I'm just unsatisfied. I can do whatever you think you can do. I just want to prove to the world that I, Sylvanas Windrunner, can still be strong and live a wonderful life without you, Duque. Without beating around the bush, Queen Sylvanas spoke her mind. At this time, Aurelia got up and touched her sister's nose. Even if you don't want to admit defeat, you should at least have a plan. You went to fight Al-Akir while you were pregnant, and you still dare to complain that Duque stuffed Gavinrad in as insurance? The Windrunner family doesn't have such an ungrateful woman. Queen Sylvie knew that she had gone overboard after being scolded by her elder sister. She lowered her head and said, I'm sorry, elder sister. Sorry, Duque. Now that Queen Sylvanas had admitted defeat, Duque wasn't interested in scolding her anymore. Right, Duque, what about you? How far do you want to pursue power? Sasha came out of the blanket and asked with her head in her hand. If I can defeat the Burning Legion with my current strength, it doesn't matter if I don't strengthen myself. I don't actually pursue power. I just want to protect the people and things that I cherish. That's why I'm working so hard. Duque was telling the truth. Duque started to tell the three sisters about his journey in life. At first, he just didn't want to be turned into a ghoul. Because he was afraid, he cherished it. In order to protect everything he had, he worked hard. The more he had, the more he couldn't bear to part with it. Unknowingly, he did more and better. It sounded a little ridiculous, but it was actually very simple. This kind of thinking and practice that extended from the small self to the big self, and even the whole world, was much easier to accept than those exaggerated big principles and big hero ideas. As time passed, the three sisters were stunned to find that their man had become an existence that the mortals in the entire world of Azeroth had to look up to. All right, I promise you, Duque, and I promise elder sister and third sister. After I destroy Nethereo this time, I'll give birth to the child and be a good queen of Sin, Dorii. I'll no longer pursue the power that might lead to my destruction. In fact, I don't see any chance of advancement. Perhaps the last sentence was the key to Queen Sylvanas' words. So what? This time, although the Alliance showed great power and suppressed 3 elemental realms in one go. This time, although the Alliance showed great power and pacified 3 elemental realms in one go, the 3 elemental realms weren't as powerful as before. In fact, the price paid by the Alliance was not small at all. At a high level, controlling the 3 major elemental realms was a huge gain. Duque expanded the weave and announced that even the mana consumption of frost elementals would be reduced by half permanently, which won the unanimous cheers and praise of the Pharaoh. For the middle and lower levels of the Alliance, the consumption was not small at all. The aftermath of the cataclysm had not subsided at all. That's right, the withdrawal of the rioting water, fire, and wind elemental creatures only prevented the disaster from further expanding. However, the damage caused by the previous earthquake had not been pacified. For example, the large-scale flood in the wetlands, the handling of the fissures in the Elven Forest, the Western Wilderness, Stranglethorn Vale, and other places. The expansion of the disaster had to be controlled first, then disaster relief, and then resumption of production and construction. Only when a new batch of food and products was produced could society be considered to be on the right track. Before that, to put it bluntly, they could only rely on the existing resources to survive. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 3 to 5 years to restore the productivity before the cataclysm. This was especially true for food. No matter how much food was stored before, without new rice and wheat harvests, the people would still be muttering in their hearts. However, no one could compare to Duque, who had a wild imagination. There were now many new members in the factory of Iron Stove Castle. A dwarven blacksmith said in the common language, "We need to quench this thing. We need to maintain that temperature for about 5 minutes. Before this piece of steel deforms and cracks, we need to cool it quickly in water, which is water quenching. Do you understand what I mean? A fire demon next to him understood and turned to a fire elemental with an inverted triangular body behind him. Then the fire elemental got to work. When the steel was heated and kept warm for a time, Naga, who was standing next to him, waved her hand. A water elemental came over and directly wrapped the piece of steel with its body. *Z. Cooldown complete. Chapter 1848. At first, not just elemental creatures, even the dwarves couldn't adapt. This completely subverted their common sense of technology. Blast furnace? Boiler? No need. Water source? Cooling water? No need either. After mastering water, fire and wind, the first invention Xueqi made was a brand new elemental industrial system. The furnace castle itself was a volcanic crater. The fire elementals used up the fire elementals just went into the lava and came back. The water elementals weren't afraid either. Outside of the furnace castle was a snowy mountain. The fire demons and Naga that Xueqi controlled became the most important bridge between mortals and elemental creatures. Wind elementals, also known as air elementals, also played an important role in the Alliance's industrial system. In the largest wind tunnel laboratory in the furnace castle, in the past, they relied on diesel engines to pull the propellers to provide the wind needed for experiments. Now, it was the air elementals that blew the wind. The experimenters could get as much wind as they wanted with just a word. The wind speed could be adjusted at will, even at different angles. In time, the Alliance's third-generation flying battleship would probably come out. It would be a hybrid flying battleship with a combination of traditional diesel propellers and wind elementals. Not only did it ensure safety, but it also took into account the new technology. The key was that it consumed less energy and had a better endurance. Not just industrial, but in agriculture, the addition of elemental creatures quickly subverted the image of elemental creatures in the eyes of civilians. The Alliance's propaganda was like this. In the past, the cruel elemental kings Ragnaros and Al-Akir controlled them to wreak havoc on the continent. Now that Xueqi became the king of water and fire elementals, the situation was reversed. In Loch Moden and the wetlands, this was originally the dwarves' largest food production base. Because of the collapse of the boulder dam, a large area of the wetlands was submerged, and Loch Moden began to lack water. Under normal circumstances, this year's food production in Loch Moden would be finished. But with water elementals, things were different. High-level water elemental elites were mobile medium-sized reservoirs. The dwarves commanded the Naga, and the Naga commanded the water elementals. Once they were controlled, not only did they open up a new water source in Loch Moden, in fact, the underground water that the dwarves didn't discover or couldn't handle before, they also rearranged the layout of the paddy fields in Loch Moden. In the wetlands, a group of muddy water elementals with sand and mud would run into a big puddle and squat. Water leads the way, sand and mud are left behind. It didn't matter how big the puddle was or whether there were dangerous creatures such as crocodiles in it. It turned into pieces of soft mud that were rich in water. At the very least, with a little tidying up, transporting some soil over, and then using a bulldozer to flatten it, it would immediately become a piece of fertile farmland. As long as Neltharion was settled and the boulder dam was rebuilt with cement, the wetlands would become a major grain-producing province in less than 2 years. It would be thousands of miles of fertile land that belonged to the dwarves. Not only the dwarves' territory, but the entire Alliance's territory, from the northernmost Sindorii kingdom all the way to the south, to Lordaeron, Stromgard, Alterac, Gilnis, Dalagen, Stormwind, and finally Kurtiras, who had started building a new royal city in Stranglethorn Vale, were using the opportunity of the cataclysm to transform the landscape and carry out more scientific redevelopment of the land. Apart from the night elves who had always adhered to the doctrine of nature, all the races and kingdoms of the Alliance used this opportunity to reform themselves. At the throne meeting, someone asked, "Isn't there still Nesario who hasn't come out? What should we do if he attacks?" Xueqi said straightforwardly, "The reason why the cataclysm is called a cataclysm is that it was not something that could be done by Nesario or Zoth alone. This is a special effect produced by the combination of the 4 major elemental realms and Azeroth. Without the 4 major elemental realms working together to pull the elements of the world to resonate together, the destruction of the planet would have been impossible." "What if Nesario attacks?" Muradin looked a little cautious. Our hero squad and the Sleeping Dragon Temple will join forces to fight the attack immediately. Also, can a black dragon destroy nearly 10 million square miles of land at the same time? As soon as Xueqi said this, everyone suddenly understood. Azeroth was very large. Xueqi had just said square miles, which was the way the Chinese were used to. The total territory of the Alliance was about 20 to 30 million square kilometers. This was not bragging. The Elven Forest alone was 1,300 kilometers from east to west, and the widest part was more than 400 kilometers, with a total area of 330,000 square kilometers. Plus the Reedridge Mountains, the Western Wilderness, the Twilight Forest, the Upwind Path, the Swamp of Sorrows, and half of Stranglethorn Vale. Today, Stormwind alone had more than 2 million square kilometers of territory. The specific figures could not be calculated because no detailed geological survey had been done. The 7 human kingdoms, the territory of the 3 Hammer Dwarves, Nomarigan, the Night Elves Danasuska and a small half of Kalimdor, the Blood Elves Dorii, the Dreenei's Blue Mystic Island, and the enclaves of Northrend. One had to know that apart from the Dragonbone Waste and the Northwind Taiga, Northrend was basically the territory of the Alliance. The ratio of square miles to square kilometers was 1:58. 20 million square kilometers might be considered small. It was a pity that the Alliance now only had a population of more than 10 million. Even if the ice fields, mountains and wastelands were excluded, it was still a typical case of vast land but sparsely populated. The leaders of the Throne Conference could see that Xueqi was now a classic case of grasping the big and letting go of the small. As long as the overall situation was one, the losses of small places did not affect the overall situation. It could be foreseen that the places attacked by Nethario and his Twilight Dragons would definitely suffer losses. Under the surveillance of the magic net all over the world, once the densely populated areas of all the member states of the Alliance were attacked, they would definitely respond immediately. With Xueqi, a demigod of the magic net who was proficient in teleportation, it was completely possible to make the attackers suffer the consequences. Perhaps even their lives would be spared. Since the damage caused by the attack to the Alliance was limited, the Alliance could take advantage of the opportunity of the cataclysm, forcing the residents to migrate and carry out a comprehensive development. As long as the population, productivity and resource development went up, even if some people died, it would still be a big gain in the overall situation. Jaina smiled. I'm impressed. You can turn a world-destroying cataclysm into an opportunity to promote the development of the Alliance in one go. Is this the so-called elemental economy? Jaina did not know that the term she had casually mentioned had actually set off a craze among economists and historians about the topic of elemental creatures promoting the development of science and technology. While he shifted his attention back to the internal affairs, Duke did not forget about the ongoing war. Through the Eridar Gemini, Xueqi learned a new piece of information. What? You're saying that the Horde didn't run into the Twilight Dragons Varion, Cenarion, and Sinestra when they attacked Twilight Fortress? Chapter 1849. Recently, Gemini had been sent to the Horde by Xueqi. Xueqi subconsciously believed that the rest of the Twilight Hammer was already in Zotha's territory. If they were to enter a real cult with an evil god as a backdrop, Gemini would be defeated in no time. Duke didn't want Gemini to be secretly brainwashed or implanted with something unclean in her mind, only to end up harming himself. Therefore, Xueqi believed that this wasn't something Gemini should be involved in. Instead, the Horde was more suitable for Gemini. Gemini was indeed very successful. However, Brainless Roar didn't kill Variana, Serenaron, or Sinestra before taking over the Twilight Fortress. This news made Xueqi feel as disgusted as swallowing a fly. If Sinestra was there, even if the Horde could take over the Twilight Fortress, they would have to bleed to the last drop and use up all their strength. Unfortunately, Oni's mother wasn't there, which made Brainless Roar famous. That's right, Brainless Roar killed hundreds of thousands of Horde people and forced the other 4 races to leave. However, because he took over the Twilight Fortress and cut off the 2 heads of the traitor Gujar, he was still a great hero among the young orcs. So it's not time yet? Although Xueqi had messed with the goddess of fate countless times and was about to complete the great achievement of taming fate, fate would occasionally throw a tantrum at Xueqi, which made Xueqi feel like he couldn't completely understand it. Xueqi kept causing trouble, and fate's hand kept trying to fix the flow of fate. It felt like if he didn't intervene when the other party was about to die or when there was a big change in fate, it would be difficult to ruin the path of fate. Just like how Xueqi tried to kill Thrall when he was still a baby. But he didn't succeed. Master, Do you want us to take advantage of the chaos in the horde to control that grim totem and have her assassinate Thrall? Queen Saloras suggested with a charming smile. The air suddenly froze. A terrifying pressure, as if the entire world was pressing down on them, instantly froze Gemini's body. This wasn't a simple soul suppression, nor was it the purest double purgatory of ice and fire elements. Instead, it was the feeling that every magic circuit in his body was completely controlled by Xueqi, and every organ in his body was under his control. Salolas found that there was a strange change in her vision. The vision of her left and right eyes was not connected. She immediately understood that her eyeballs were being forced to look with her left eye and to look with her right eye. She noticed that her sister, Aura's, was also in the same state. Xueqi was using such a terrifying and strange method to tell her that the Gemini twins were only his slaves. My puppet. Do whatever I tell you to do, but don't touch anything that you shouldn't do. We were wrong. Master. Please spare my life. In the mouth that was still allowed to control itself, Gemini's lips spat out the same weak words. When she regained control of her body, Gemini was completely drenched, as if she had been fished out of the water. After telling Gemini to get out of here, Xueqi fell into deep thought. At this time, Xueqi received a soul message from his mount. Xueqi sent a telepathic message over. Onyxia, I have something for you to do. At this time, Alexstrasza was preparing to hold a dragon meeting in the Wyrmrest Temple. Although Xueqi, the mortals, and the guardian Hyjal formed by the god of the wilderness had joined forces to thwart the conspiracy of Lager and Al-Akir, the threat of the Twilight Hammer was still not eliminated. Therefore, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza decided to convene the Dragon Kings and the Backbone to hold a meeting to deal with the Twilight Hammer. Before the meeting, Alexstrasza and Krasis communicated in the Ruby Temple at the bottom of the Wyrmrest Temple. But the meeting ended on bad terms. The Queen said, "The mortals have done too much to protect this world. After all, this cataclysm was caused by the traitor Nesario and Zoth. We, the Wyrmrest Temple, cannot remain silent. I want to gather all the dragons and attack the believers of the Twilight Hammer on a global scale." Krasis was stunned. All the dragons, including the black dragons and blue dragons? Of course, they are also an important part of the Wyrmrest Temple. I think the blue dragons have not recovered from the loss of Malygos, so we should not send them out so hastily. Moreover, among the black dragons, Onyxia is the only black dragon who is willing to obey the orders of the Wyrmrest Temple. We should get rid of them. Humph. Could it be that the bronze dragons and green dragons also have their own missions? In the end, just like the previous times, only the Red Dragon Legion will charge and break through the enemy lines? Cleostras, you are too selfless. Nesario is the common enemy of the 5-color dragons. I have decided to hold a meeting of the dragons as soon as possible. I will squeeze enough combat power from the various Dragon Kings. If this is the case, Your Majesty, please allow me to refuse to participate in the meeting. I don't think this is appropriate, and Xueqi has not sent us an application for joint operations. This means that he thinks that the alliance alone, with the power of the god of the wilderness at most, is enough to deal with the current situation. When it came to Xueqi, Alexstrasza was convinced, but she was also a little emotional. Pay attention. It is us 5-color dragons, not mortals, who have been entrusted with the duty of guarding this planet by the Titans. It is an unexpected surprise for mortals and native creatures to contribute to the protection of this world, not an obligation. The only ones who have the obligation to protect are us dragons and the various guardians. Proudly raising her chin, the queen ordered, "Cleostras, you don't have to go to the dragon meeting. You stay and protect the red dragon egg in the sanctum." "Yes, Your Majesty." Krasis lowered his dragon head. Alexstrasza spread her huge dragon wings that seemed to be able to cover a small town, spread them high, and disappeared from Krasis' sight in a few moments. She went to the top of the Wyrmrest Temple that towered into the clouds. It was not a simple flight. The Wyrmrest Temple had various layers of subspace defense. In fact, she had just passed through several spaces. Krasis curled up his body and did not even enter a state of pretend sleep. He could not help but think of Xueqi's report. As an old ally of the Wyrmrest Temple, Xueqi had always been very outstanding. This time, it was also him who reported the matter of the Twilight Dragon in advance. The Twilight Dragon, this was a dragon egg that could contaminate a normal 5-color dragon, and then promote the transformation, so that a dragon that should have become a 5-color dragon could mutate into a Twilight Dragon. This news made the Wormrest Temple highly vigilant, so there was the initiative of Krasis, the big boss of the Red Dragon clan, to personally guard the dragon egg. Worried, Krasis ordered the Red Dragon with a double-headed sword not far away. Bring 3 more teams of Dragonians and half-dragons here. Chapter 1850. The Dragonborn answered on the spot. Yes. Very soon, the Red Jade Holy Temple became a place where there was a sentry every few steps. Krasis himself, 150 Dragonborn, and 200 half-Dragonborn were in charge. Even if they were attacked by thousands of Twilight disciples, he was confident that they could hold out until Alexstrasza returned. However, his confidence soon disappeared with the sound of the siren. Woo woo woo. It was the Titan's horn. That was the highest-level siren. It meant that the invading enemy was strong enough to destroy the dragon's sleep sanctum. Krasis pointed with his right claw and immediately saw black spots like sesame seeds in the far north of the magic mirror's field of vision. Soon, the black spots rapidly grew larger. Not only their shape, but even their color could be seen clearly. The purple scales with a tinge of pink in them made Krasis's dragon eyes narrow abruptly. Twilight dragons. Not just 3 or 2 but thousands of them. Krasis' rich experience in aerial combat told him that almost every Twilight dragon here was equivalent to an adult chromatic dragon. If these Twilight dragons were only a threat to the dragon's slumber shrine, then the larger dragons leading them were the real killing machines. First of all, it occupied the center of the entire line of sight. No matter how you looked at it, it would always be the focus. That was Nethario, the Wing of Death. He had an abnormally huge body, with a wingspan of at least 300 meters. His small mountain-level body that swelled up like a balloon was now covered in a layer of terrifying acid as if water had been poured over it. The acid seemed to be controlled by some secret method as it lingered on his huge body. This was not to defend against the enemy's attacks, but to dissolve the dragon limbs that were constantly growing out of his body. Krasis saw with his own eyes in the magic mirror that a dragon's claw that was not inferior to his own suddenly grew out of a hole in Nethario's chest. Then, it twitched violently in the corrosive acid, becoming thinner and thinner, and finally, completely dissolved. Nethario alone was enough to give the dragon's sleep sanctum a headache. Krasis also saw Sinestra, an ancient female black dragon who used to be extremely powerful. Obviously, she was already dead and had become a death dragon that even the chromatic dragons hated. How ironic. He clearly hated Nethario to death, but after he died and resurrected Nethario, he immediately followed Nethario obediently. Apart from these 2 familiar dragons, there were other commander-level dragons, Variona and Serenarian. Krasis felt that he wouldn't be able to win against either of them. Only a true dragon aspect would be able to suppress them. The top-notch evil dragon Nethario, the second-level Sinestra, plus 2 Twilight dragons and thousands of Twilight dragons. This lineup was definitely luxurious. Roar! In the upper levels of the Sleeping Dragon Temple, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza's huge dragon shadow rose first, followed by the Emerald Dragon King Isra, the Bronze Dragon King Nosdormu, and the new Magic King Kalegos. Following closely behind them were thousands of 4-colored giant dragons. Compared to the relatively simple purple light on the other side, the dragon's slumber shrine's light was much more colorful. Alexstrasza had originally asked Onyxia to recruit dark dragons as subordinates. However, after 10,000 years of depravity, most of the adult dark dragons had become dragon villains. They were very disgusted with Onyxia, the so-called princess who brought shame to the black dragons and ran off to be the demigod Duke's mount. There was no dark dragon bird at all. Onyxia wasn't keen on power or taking in subordinates. The strongest subordinates were a bunch of unpresentable young dragons, and then there were fledglings, dark dragons, and draconians. So in theory, there were only 4 of the 5-colored dragons left, and the main force of the army was here today. It was certain that Nethario had led the Twilight Dragon army with the mentality of fighting a decisive battle. What surprised Krasis was that the new Earth aspect dragon Onyxia, who was also present at the meeting today, didn't fight. He didn't know if it was because of the rumor that she was afraid of her parents. Krasis wanted to fight with the queen he admired, but he was more aware of his responsibility. He was guarding the future of the Red Dragon army. Just as Krasis was secretly raising his guard, there was suddenly a shrill scream around him. Ah! All of a sudden, every Red Dragon warrior in the entire Red Jade Temple entered a state of combat readiness. They clenched their halberds and swords in their hands. Krasis let out a loud roar, and a surging draconic aura immediately filled the Ruby Jade Temple. Whew! Come out, as he roared. He turned his head and ordered a draconian, quickly inform His Majesty to send more reinforcements here. He was very smart. He knew that the other party had chosen to attack head-on even though they knew he was here. This meant that the other party had absolute confidence in attacking, and not relying on cannon fodder to destroy the dragon eggs here. Krasus didn't know that fate had already taken a major turn. He had no idea how the other party had passed through the realm net of temple guards all over the Dragonbone Waste. The next second, a large number of Twilight Hammer believers poured in. Some attacked the Draconians, while others began to cast evil magic on the dragon eggs scattered throughout the sanctuary. Krasus, of course, immediately attacked these invaders, but he couldn't use breath or magic, because spells with a wide attack range would destroy the dragon eggs. He could only use the most basic physical methods such as grabbing. He wasn't too worried about the situation in front of him, because in terms of combat power, the Red Dragon Guards had the absolute advantage. And as several adult red dragons that were patrolling nearby received the news and rushed over, the battle suddenly became one-sided. It's safe. Just as Krasus had this thought, an adult red dragon in front of him was instantly torn apart. Scarlet blood spurted out of the dragon's head. Like a dying earthworm, it tumbled violently on the floor of the sanctuary before it hung down and stopped moving. Krasus was shocked. He could clearly feel the powerful aura of the giant dragon outside the gate of the sanctuary. That was a terrifying aura that far surpassed that of the ancient dragon. Those who could have such power were all of the strongest in the dragon race. Usually, only the direct bloodline descendants of the Dragon King could have such strength. That kind of dark power was so dense that just feeling it made him shiver. For a second, Krasus almost thought that Onyxia had betrayed him, or that Nefarian had resurrected. Obviously not. A huge black dragon that he had never seen before stepped into the Red Dragon Holy Land. Hello, Cleostras. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lazio. Chapter 1851. In the face of a black dragon that had the right to call itself a prince, Krasus felt a lot of pressure. At that moment, he did not notice that a chaotic historical event that should not have happened was happening, or rather, had already happened. In the original history, before the Cataclysm, there was an Azeroth version of Orphan Zhao. The Red Dragons were actually a race that was equivalent to the Virgin Mary. Among them, there was a dragon named Riastasa who was looking for a pure black dragon egg that had not been invaded by evil. Because she was thinking, if she could somehow find a pure black dragon egg, then it could prove that the black dragons could still live freely in the world without being bewitched by the ancient gods. After all, the mission of the Red Dragons was to protect life. Getting rid of every black dragon in Azeroth was against their purpose. But if the Red Dragons could find a way to redeem the black dragons, then it meant that there was hope for them to continue living. The problem was that the wings of death had been corrupted by the ancient gods, and since the ancient war, he had been the enemy of his fellow dragons. The black dragons under his command had also become his minions. One after another, they had become a group of crazy, neurotic fallen black dragons. But would there be a dragon that could lay a pure dragon egg that was not affected by the ancient gods at all? And if it was not controlled by the wings of death and the evil power of the ancient gods, what would the future of this dragon be? So the Virgin Mary Red Dragon Riastasa caught a female black dragon, Nishiandra, and forced her to study how to lay eggs. In the end, she laid an egg, and it was a very rare egg that belonged to the Wings of Death, Nesario. For this matter, be it the Wings of Death who was frantically searching for this egg or the Red Dragons, they were all caught up in this whirlpool. Moreover, this egg had its own will even before it was born. When the egg, although not yet out of the shell, developed to a maturity level where it could think independently and carry out plans, it sent out a cry for help to a group of sneaky fellows who were proficient in stealing and could even come and go freely under the eyes of the Red Dragons, the thieves of Ravenholt Manor. Thus, there was a strange case of the dragon egg disappearing. After many twists and turns in the plot, the Black Dragon Prince Razio was born. With the help of all kinds of resources, he quickly grew into a powerful dark dragon and called himself the Last Dark Dragon. In theory, he was both good and evil in the original history, and had a good relationship with King Anduin Wrynn. However, at the time node of the King of Draenor, he participated as the mastermind in rescuing Braindead Roar and letting Braindead Roar go to another timeline to cause trouble. All in all, this was a powerful, intelligent, and sinister dragon prince. Unfortunately, fate had its way with dragons. In this life, with Onyxia's cleansing, the title of the last normal black dragon would not fall onto Lachio. More importantly, Without the protection of the Red Dragon tribe, Lachio wouldn't have the luxury to wander around the Dragon's Slumber Shrine, the Alliance, and other forces. So Ratio, who was in front of Krasis, was obviously a henchman of the Wings of Death. No one knew that because of fate, Wing died prematurely. And the price of resurrection was the price of his own son smashing Nefarian. What was even more infuriating to Wing was that his disappointing traitorous woman had shamelessly knelt down and licked his great enemy, Duque, as a mount. So, after Nesario was resurrected by Enzos, he paid more attention to his children than ever before. So, in this life, there was no such thing as Nishiandra being forced to give birth to a pure dragon egg. Almost as soon as Wing regained his freedom, he found Nishiandra and directly left this female black dragon, who he had almost killed when he was having sex with her, with an evil child that truly belonged to him. Lachio. In this life, he was the successor of the new Black Dragon army, and appeared in the Dragon's Slumber Shrine as a symbol of absolute evil. As soon as he attacked, he directly beheaded an adult red dragon. This destructive power was simply frightening. Krasis was ready to risk his life. Just then, another voice suddenly broke in. I didn't expect that damned father of mine would actually give me a younger brother. This is really making me worried. Should I kill my younger brother to prevent him from fighting with me for the position of Earth Guardian? Or should I persuade him to be like me, to become a mount in exchange for the world's forgiveness? A graceful woman wearing a black robe with golden edges leisurely walked into the Red Jade Shrine. The one who came in was naturally the Black Dragon Princess Onyxia in her human form. The Pentashade dragons each had their own holy lands in Noscent, because it was an absolute protection zone for nurturing the next generation. Even if Onyxia was now a dragon aspect, it was an absolute taboo to enter the dragon egg hatching area of another dragon race without permission. But Krasis couldn't care less. Onyxia was obviously here to help. The Black Dragon Princess suddenly cast the ultimate transformation spell, and in less than a second, she turned into a black dragon that was a size larger than Lachio and confronted him. Clairstraz, hurry up and kill those Twilight spellcasters. They want to pollute the dragon eggs. If necessary, even the dragon eggs must be purified with dragon breath. After saying that, Onyxia flapped her wings and pounced towards her younger brother. It was not uncommon for a battle between two demigod colossal dragons to turn into an earth-shattering one another. It was Duque who ordered her to save the day. If the Red Dragon race's dragon eggs were all destroyed by the shockwaves of the battle, the Red Dragon race would eventually go berserk. It would be better if she didn't come at all. The Black Dragon took a deep breath as soon as she opened her mouth. Although she was in her human form, she could use her ultimate move earlier if she accumulated fire elements in advance. The conical dragon breath of nearly 60 degrees Celsius was too much for Lachio to handle. The magic resistance of the Pentashade dragons was quite high. Their tough dragon scales and dragon skin were born with high-purity elements. It was not easy to injure a dragon with elemental attacks. Often, dragons had to rely on physical combat to decide the outcome of a battle. Onyxia's deep breath seemed to have broken this rule. Lazio jumped backward as if he was jumping. His wings flapped continuously, and he almost screamed as he dodged this deep breath. How can it be so hot? Onyxia grinned and revealed a mocking smile. Don't you know who my master is? Chapter 1852. Ordinary flames could hardly threaten a real WYRM, let alone a demigod WYRM. Onyxia only knew how to use fire. Originally, with her aptitude, using the deep breath to its limit was not a big deal. Dealing with elites was indeed impressive, but dealing with commander-level enemies was starting to feel like it wasn't enough. This was determined by the upper limit of her vitality. Ever since Du Mok took control of the Land of Fire and became the master of the fire elemental world, everything had changed. Since he could generously transfer a portion of the elements to an outsider like Kale, he could not leave Onyxia behind. After all, she cooperated with him at all times. Whatever position he asked her to, the Black Dragon would do it. It wouldn't be a bad idea to occasionally have a more focused play. 5%. This was the amount of elements that Du Mok gave his mount. As the Land of Fire further integrated into the world of Azeroth, it communicated and complemented the fire elements of the entire world. In fact, the absolute amount of elements that this element took up was increasing by the day. Having external assistance and relying solely on one's own physical strength were two completely different things. At that time, Lazio also urgently spat out dragon breath to resist deep breath. Firstly, it was rushed, and secondly, there was an absolute difference in quality and quantity. The fire elements that he spat out were actually caught in mid-air by the more mysterious, deep breath, and rolled back to burn Lasio's dragon body. Ah! Lasio screamed and retreated from the passage to the red jade holy temple. He had to retreat. Onyxia, who was even larger in size, had already pounced forward. The red jade holy temple was located below the dragon sleep temple. Although the space was not small even by the standards of a dragon, it was not suitable for a battle. For a dragon, most of the time, strength, agility, and vitality were directly proportional to its size. The larger the dragon, the stronger its overall attributes. In the limited space of the red jade holy temple, it could be forced to the point where there was nowhere to hide. It would become the most primitive wrestling. Looking at its size, Lasio knew that he was going to lose. He could only retreat out of the red jade holy temple and fight for space. Onyxia pounced after him. Lasio glanced at the battle in the sky north of the Dragonbone Waste and fled north without looking back. His father and mother were there, and according to the intelligence, they were the nemesis of his good sister. Although it was embarrassing, the dark dragon race was mostly people with no moral integrity. Losing face was better than losing one's life. Lasio flew north without looking back. Right at this moment, he suddenly felt his massive dragon body stagnate. It was the illusion of suddenly falling into a pool of paste. Impossible! Lasio exclaimed. What he said was impossible. He subconsciously believed that there was no existence that could use simple magic to imprison a demigod black dragon. That's not something a mortal can do. It wasn't something that a female black dragon like Onyxia who only knew how to play with fire would do. In his astonishment, Lasio twisted his snake-like neck and looked behind him. He saw something that made his soul jump out of his body. On Onyxia's dragon claws, there was a huge ring-like object. This should be some kind of magic tool. Lasio watched as his sister activated one of them, and then his body, which had just regained some mobility, immediately became sluggish again. Demigod tool? Normally, no demigod would inject a large amount of divine power to create a single-use magic tool. After all, it was quite exhausting and not beneficial. Coincidentally, there was a demigod who did this, and this demigod was undoubtedly Xueqi. He had engraved the Titan runes on the huge mithril ring so that he could instantly use the Titan's power to activate deceleration. That was equivalent to him casting a demigod spell himself. Even with the demigod dragon's magic resistance, there would be a moment of numbness. This was simply a waste, but in a battle between demigod dragons, this was undoubtedly the key factor that would tip the scales of victory. The massive black dragon princess seized the opportunity and pounced forward. She swept her dragon tail from a high angle and hit her brother's waist heavily. Every dragon's tail was different. Her dragon tail was just like a standard meteor hammer. Not to mention that the end was huge and oval, and there were a few extremely hard and thick spikes. Lasio immediately let out a wail. Not only was his left rib pierced, but he was also pulled by the force of the attack, leaving several deep wounds that exposed his bones. The violent blow caused him to fall from mid-air. He crashed into the snowy field full of dragon bones. His colossal body smashed through several dragon skeletons in an instant. It was as if his actions had disturbed the souls of the sleeping dragons, and the dragonbone wilderness seemed to make a dissatisfied grunt at that moment. Sorry. My stupid brother. Since I'm here, I won't let you go to the north. In mid-air, Onyxia, who was flapping her huge wings, stared coldly at her blood relatives. Other families would at most fight. The Black Dragon family was simply asking for death. Lasio knew that he had failed, not only in terms of strategy, but also in terms of combat power and combat experience. He was inferior to his sister in terms of elements. What was worse was that because of his age and lack of combat experience, he could not unleash his tyrannical physical fitness. It couldn't be helped. He was controlled by his father Nesario, as soon as he was born. His father was not a benevolent father. He would slowly feed him moves and teach him how to fight. His father was an empty fish, and he directly ordered him to pollute the dragon eggs of the Red Jade Holy Temple and the other temples. If he did not do well, he would be killed. Originally, Krasis would be a good opponent and a good whetstone. Using the difference in rank, Lasio could hone his skills in actual combat, and while he was entangled with Krasis, the idiotic Twilight believers below could complete the task given by his father. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. But why did an enhanced version of his sister suddenly appear? This was clearly not giving him a way out. Completely afraid to approach his sister, Lassio struggled on the ground, turned around, and flew east. He did not realize that it was Onyxia who was hovering in the air just now, forcing him to fly to the east. Hee. My stupid brother. I wish I could say goodbye to you forever today. Onyxia glanced at the fierce battle in the northern sky, and then flew after Lassio. Lassio flapped his wings, and the more he flew, the more he felt that something was wrong. He used all his strength to fly, but he felt that his sister's Onyxia's speed should not be that low. Just as he flew over the Dragon's Pine River on the east side of the Dragonbone Waste, a large cluster of dense light suddenly approached at high speed. Boom! Lassio was hit by hundreds of cannonballs. Accompanied by the Black Dragon Prince's painful cry, he fell again and slammed into the ice of the Dragon's Pine River, breaking the ice by the river. He fell into the water. Chapter 1853. Trap. Everything was a trap. When Lassio's huge body fell into the water, he was stunned by the scene in front of him. Next to him, there was a huge water giant sitting in the river, hugging its legs. The river was not shallow, but compared to this underwater giant, it was like a small ditch. What made Lassio's heart palpitate was the strong waves of water elemental energy emitted from the giant. It was definitely not a small sea giant. That was... A dumb giant dragon actually fell into the river. Normally, it was very difficult to transmit sound underwater. However, this giant's voice directly entered Lassio's mind. Lassio almost peed his pants. He knew who this water giant with a strange golden chain on his chest was. It was the former lord of the water elemental realm, Neptulin. Lassio felt like he was being attacked by a dog. You're the former lord of the water elemental realm. What are you doing in this river? Neptulin grinned and rose to his feet. As he stood up, the water level of Dragon's Pine River, which had not changed for thousands of years, suddenly rose by 100 meters in 10 seconds. This was a very exaggerated number. Under normal circumstances, the banks on both sides of the river would definitely suffer. However, the water level only rose to the width of the river. The banks did not move at all. Neptulin was obviously trying to trap him. No. Wah! Lassio choked on a mouthful of water. At this moment, how could he not know that his opponent was here to kill him? He struggled to leave this strange water body. Unfortunately, he only managed to struggle for 3 seconds before several white lines of water closed in on him from afar. One of them was a petite female Naga, only slightly larger than a human. She was dressed in luxurious accessories, and judging from the golden crown on her head, she was at least a queen. The other one was a huge water elemental, and the last one was a huge and ugly strange fish. Neptulin, good job. This time, you've done a good job. The female Naga spoke with the voice of her soul. Neptulin's face showed a look of joy. It did not matter if it was fake or not. The Naga queen turned her head. Oh, it was actually the legendary Prince Ratio. What an honor to meet you. I am Queen Naga, the demigod of Lake Azeroth Lord Emir, the queen regent of the tidal throne, Vashj. This is the first time we meet, and I believe it will also be the last time. With that, she raised her hand. Neptulin, Unstable Hydas, and Yusler, the 3 super thugs, grinned hideously as they pounced on Lachio. In the northern sky, an incomparably tragic internal war of the dragon clan was going on. As far as the eye could see, there were gorgeous and dazzling dragon breaths and flashing magic spells everywhere, and the air was filled with entangled battles. Whether it was the Wyvern guardian of the Dragon Slumber Shrine or the Twilight Wyvern belonging to Nesario, they were all bloodthirsty, and used the fiercest means to deal with these enemies who were theoretically their compatriots. Perhaps the moment they met, a large cloud of murky and stinky blood rain would fall from the sky, or even scattered pieces of internal organs. With a flash, the dragon claw slashed down, and perhaps an entire row of ribs was neatly severed. In terms of combat experience, the 4-color dragon warriors were obviously superior to the Twilight Wyvern. The aerial combat experience accumulated over the years was not something that the Twilight Wyvern, who grew up on stimulants and pills, could compare to. In the initial battle, the 4-color dragon and the Twilight Wyvern had a shocking battle loss ratio of 1:10. However, the Dragon Slumber Coalition army immediately discovered that something was wrong. The strength and physical fitness of the Twilight Wyvern were comparable to that of the 4-color dragon. Their special ability was to create a unique twilight domain space, and use this space to crazily absorb energy from the outside world to promote their own growth. As long as there was enough energy for them to absorb, they could grow rapidly. It only took a few months or even a few weeks for a twilight wyvern to hatch to adulthood, but it took hundreds of thousands of years for an ordinary dragon to hatch to adulthood. The terror of having Nesario in charge was reflected at this time. This was a terrifying characteristic that did not exist in the original history. Enzos had bestowed a terrifying halo effect on the wings of death. This terrifying halo, which covered an area of more than 10 kilometers, greatly strengthened the twilight domain of each twilight wyvern. Not only was the domain larger, but the effect was also more amazing. As long as any energy transfer occurred in the twilight domain, the energy would be absorbed. Whether it was the aftermath of magic that was cast, or the flesh and blood that fell from mid-air and passed through this space. Whether it was the four-color dragons or the twilight wyverns, as long as it was energy, it would be absorbed without any resistance. Many of the dragons found that their opponents suddenly swelled up as if they were inflated, and then their speed, agility, and vitality skyrocketed as if they had been injected with chicken blood. At first, the twilight wyverns did not have any brains and only knew how to fight by instinct. However, after a few rounds, as long as they did not die, they could use the energy absorbed from their surroundings to repair their bodies, and learn new tricks from their opponents to deal with the four-color dragon. Soon, the battle-loss ratio between the two sides changed dramatically. From the initial 1-10, it became 1-3. Sister! The sleeping dragon temple is finished. Isera shouted. Alexstrasza, of course, knew that it would not work, but she really could not spare her hands. King against king, general against general, soldier against soldier. Just Nesario, who was as huge as a mountain, was enough for the few dragon aspects to suffer. Not to mention the addition of Sinestra, and the two twilight wyverns Varion and Serenarian, who were quite capable of fighting. Varion and Serenarian were not as strong as the dragon aspects, but they could steadily suppress the ancient wyvern of the four-color dragon. After a few rounds, 3 ancient wyverns had been seriously injured and forced to retreat. In fact, if it were not for Nesario frantically chasing after his 3 former siblings, the sleeping dragon coalition army would have suffered even more losses. At this time, a black dragon shadow suddenly entered the field of vision of the two sides. Your Majesty Alexstrasza, the Ruby Jade Temple was ambushed by the black dragon Prince Ratio, but I took care of him. Now it is basically safe. The first half of Onyxia's words made the Red Dragon Queen's heart jump to her throat, but the second half made her feel for the first time that this junior was quite useful. The black dragon turned her head and taunted the 2 twilight wyverns who were obviously several sizes larger. Humph. Varion and Serenarian, right? Poor guys. He didn't know anything and was used as a weapon. Do you think you are very strong? Let me tell you, I can fight 10 of you guys. It was a clumsy provocation, but for the relatively simple twilight wyverns, it was good enough as long as it worked. In an instant, Onyxia had pulled away 2 of the enemy's main forces. Before leaving, she also sent a message to the Red Dragon Queen. Duque requests to join the battle. Chapter 1854. Duque. Alexstrasza really had a love-hate relationship with Duque. Once upon a time, Duque was just such a small and weak human. At that time, she hung out with Duque purely because she felt that this human was interesting. It was easy to get tired of living after living for too long. This was not a derogatory term, but a literal one. If it was not for the power and responsibility given to her by the Titans, she really did not know how she had lived for the past 25,000 years. Perhaps she would have developed strange interests like some blue dragons. For example, falling in love with a well, or falling in love with the fairy sister, soul healer, in the graveyard. After seeing all kinds of situations in the mortal world, her dragon life only had a few interests left: curiosity and excitement. Of course, she would not put herself in danger just to experience the feeling of heartbeat just for the sake of pure excitement. Because of the novelty and excitement, it was more like a hobby outside of fulfilling her duty as a guardian. That was why she did not hesitate to help Duke. Perhaps it was to repay a debt of gratitude, or perhaps it was purely to see how far this little human who always surprised her could go. She did not expect that in a mere 20 years, not even 1,000th of her life as a dragon guardian, Duke Marcus, a human with meager strength at the beginning, had grown to a level comparable to her. Alexstrasza was a little conflicted. She was happy that Duque was strong. He was too strong. She was conflicted. She always felt that she had lived for 25,000 years in vain. Why could it not compare to what Xueqi had achieved in 1,000th of her time? Living for too long, living for too long. Dragon hearts would become a little conflicted. Mortals clearly looked very simple. So why did a monstrous peerless powerhouse like Xueqi appear? Not only was he strong, but he could also stir up the general trend of the entire world. Even she felt that all the dragon guardians and guardians were led by the nose by him. However, every single one of them was willing to do so because his actions were righteous and in line with the way of the heavens and the way of the Titans. Sometimes, when Alexstrasza looked at Onyxia, who had a terrible reputation and was cunning, and saw her intelligence plummet after being subdued by Xueqi, she would see a rare joy on Onyxia's face that was almost impossible for dragons to have. She couldn't help but put herself in Onyxia's shoes. If he became Xueqi's mount like Onyxia, would he? Every time she thought of this, the queen would feel like her heart was in a mess. This was practically a blasphemy against the duties of a Titan. She found it difficult to describe the complex feelings in her heart, but she forcefully pushed them out of her mind. Time returned to the present. For a moment, she was distracted, and she was almost hit by Nesario's huge claws. Fortunately, although Nesario's body size had increased, his speed and agility seemed to have decreased significantly, which gave her a chance to save him. She screamed in her heart, "I can't hesitate anymore. I am the leader of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. All the dragons are waiting for my command. A leader must never hesitate." As far as the eye could see, countless dragons were fighting in the sky. She already knew how terrifying the twilight dragons were. 10,000 years ago, Nesario had betrayed the Pentashade dragons, and the dragons that had once blotted out the sky had withered because of that battle. It took the four-colored dragons 10,000 years to barely restore their numbers to a less miserable state. If she cared about her pride and hoped to use the power of the Dragon Slumber Shrine to deal with the resurrected traitor, Nesario, she was afraid that the Dragon Slumber Shrine would suffer more damage than the last time. The enemy in front of her was strong, and she was weak. Even if she won, it would only be a Pyrrhic victory. What about the void battlefield in the future? Alexstrasza gritted her dragon teeth and spread her divine thoughts. Xueqi, I know you're here. Come and help. I know what you're thinking. The Dragon Slumber Shrine will be the most loyal ally of the Alliance in the future. Her spiritual call instantly received a reply. Yo! I wanted to make a move a long time ago, but I was afraid of interfering with the internal affairs of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. You make it sound like you didn't have a part in the first siege against Nesario. The man and the dragon teased each other. Everyone knew that the little knot in their hearts had disappeared without a trace. Originally, the Dragon Slumber Coalition army did not know how the Alliance would make a move, but they soon found out. Woo woo woo. It was a strange sound coming from the east of the Dragonbone Wilderness. Many twilight dragons turned their heads to look to the east in a daze, but the four-colored dragons came to their senses and squatted down with their hands on their heads. Oh no, it was a gesture of self-defense. Countless artillery shells gathered into a torrential rain of artillery shells that were denser than locusts. They crossed a distance of 10,000 meters and blasted toward the area where the dragons were fighting fiercely in mid-air. At a glance, the Alliance's artillery was simply a trap for its allies. This was an indiscriminate attack. In mid-air, the four-colored dragons and the twilight dragons were all wrestling with each other, and there was no obvious formation to distinguish. At most, it was a cooperation between a few dragons in 2s and 3s. It was not a positional battle like in a traditional war. But the moment the artillery shells exploded, the essence of Xueqi's bombardment could be seen. All the artillery shells were the classic, Type 3 bullets. This kind of shotgun shot out from a standard barrel would explode when it flew into the air of the battle, forming a large number of fragments. For enemies with relatively weak bodies, this was a fatal metal storm. Even if it was a griffin, its skin would be lacerated and its wings would be crippled in this kind of storm. For a giant dragon that was covered in dragon scales and dragon skin that could be said to have thick skin and flesh, and even the dragon's eyes had a layer of extremely hard cornea, the lethality of the shrapnel was almost zero. More importantly, these artillery shells were all specially made for the holy light. The Twilight Dragon's twilight domain was derived from the classic power of corruption. It was a perfect counter to the holy light. This meant that the four-colored dragons were completely fine, while the twilight dragons cried out in pain as if they had been splashed with acid. It was like a cooperative game. As long as the option, friendly damage, was not ticked, You could casually stab your teammates and be fine. It seemed very unscientific, but it happened just like that. This is amazing. Isara could not help but exclaim. What did the Twilight Dragons rely on to become stronger and stronger? Wasn't it that disgusting Twilight Domain? Once the Twilight Domain was suppressed, the four-colored dragons began to gain the upper hand again. In the sky above the Dragon's Pine River in the east, a huge fleet was circling the flying fortress Naxxramas. In fact, at the moment, less than half of the fleet fired their cannons. Naxxramas's secondary cannons were firing. In the command room, Tyron's beautiful eyes darted around. Duque, did you expect that Lesio would attack the Red Jade Holy Temple? Beside her, Duque shrugged. How could that be? I only expected that Nesio would choose to attack the dragon eggs of the four-colored dragons. Chapter 1855. To be honest, he really did not think that sending Oni would actually catch Lachio. In fact, he did not even know if Lachio still existed in this world. Unfortunately, Tyrant pouted and crossed her arms, looking as if she did not believe him. Duque almost choked to death. Damn. Is this considered pretending to be the god of prophecy too much that people don't believe me even if I fail? At this time, Vashti's magic message came. That new black dragon Prince Lachio is almost done. What should we do? In the magic mirror, Vashti's red hair floated in the water, giving off a different kind of sexiness. Duque was not in the mood to appreciate it. He rubbed his chin, weighing the impact of Lachio's life and death. No matter how he thought about it, Lachio did not seem to have done anything good, nor did he really affect the general trend of history. To put it bluntly, he was the kind of guy who was an eyesore, but it did not seem to be a problem to kill him. Duque hesitated for 3 seconds, then made a throat-cutting salute. Remember to annihilate his soul. In the scene, the Black Dragon Prince, who was supposed to be a part of history, was dancing in the water. He was dragged deeper and deeper into the water by Neptulin, who was a rough man underwater. He was tossed and turned by the waves, and he sank deeper and deeper into the water. Lachio was chased all the way from Dragon's Pine River to the sea by a group of ferocious underwater bosses, through the east side of the ancient beach, and all the way to the deepest trench. A dragon soaring in the sky falling into the water was a huge mistake in itself. Now, Lachio had to pay the price in advance for his undisplayed ambition and possible mistakes. Perhaps this was unfair to a formidable dragon, but since he had chosen Nesario's side, then he was sorry. Hydas, Tidewalker, Yusler, and Neptulin swarmed forward. They continuously used various water attacks to create wounds on Lachio's body, weakening his vitality. When his speed and strength dropped drastically, Marogri the Tidewalker threw a huge anchor into his waist. Then, Neptulin threw a thick black chain and strangled his neck. Then, Hydas covered his limbs with high-purity water elemental energy. Finally, Yusler pounced on him and bit his neck. Spare me. That was Lacio's last plea. It was too late. The dignified Black Dragon Prince died sullenly in the deep sea. Vashti quietly sat in the shallow waters, casting spells as she gazed at the offering in the sea. She was suppressing and erasing Lachio's soul. On the east side of Dragon's Pine River, a neat array of cannons kept firing. The artillery finally angered Nesario, who ordered the Twilight Dragons to attack the Alliance's air force. Under his command, Valriona and Thanarion, who were being kited by Onyxia, turned around and flew east towards the Alliance's air force. An ear-piercing alarm sounded in Naxxramas almost instantly. Unlike the previous Level 2 alarm, it was preparation for an attack. This was the alarm for an enemy attack. The Alliance soldiers in the intelligence room of the stronghold observed the incoming enemy through the mage's eyes in Dragonbone Waste, as well as the stronghold's own enemy tracking system and binoculars. They stared dumbfoundedly at the dragons in the sky. The Alliance had experienced many battles since its establishment. Since Naxxramas fell into the hands of the Alliance, it had also experienced several battles, but it had never tried to fight such a large group of dragons. The last time it faced a large-scale attack was in Northrend, against the gargoyles of the Lich King Arthas. The purple-red twilight dragons approached quickly. They spread their wings and rode the wind, sweeping over from the battlefield 10 kilometers away. 10 kilometers, which was 10,000 meters, sounded very far. For these flying behemoths, it would only take a few minutes. They're really fast. Bu Lang Bronzebeard stared at this scene on the monitor and couldn't help but curl his lips. Boys, Use the armor-piercing bullets. Grenades are useless against these big guys. The 3 holy light projectiles had been proven to only be used for harassment, not to kill them. Bu Lang shouted, "Old-style main cannons. Fire in unison." Cannonballs triggered by TNT explosives were continuously fired from the muzzles of the stronghold. Even though the new cannons were all equipped with brakes to reduce the reaction force, they didn't dare to fire in a real sense. The continuous impact still caused the entire stronghold to move nearly 10 meters to the east. Under the surveillance cameras controlled by the observers, Bu Lang clearly saw that the old-style cannonballs, even after being treated with holy light, still couldn't penetrate the tough skin and scales of the Twilight Dragons. Although some of the Twilight Dragon's wings were damaged, they only slowed down. Anyway, after a round of cannonballs that seemed to shake the earth, not a single Twilight Dragon fell in midair. The human gunners could almost see the contempt at the corners of the Twilight Dragons' mouths. Taking advantage of the intermission of the human cannons, these dragon-shaped monsters created with evil secret methods quickly closed the distance between them and the flying stronghold. Many of the Alliance soldiers' hearts were about to jump out of their chests at this moment. If the Alliance's cannons couldn't cause effective damage to the enemy, it meant that this was likely to turn into a massacre of the Alliance's air force. At this time, Duque's leisurely voice sounded. "Bu Lang, relax. Don't we still have Mimran?" "Yes. According to my calculations, the new cannonballs can definitely penetrate those purple lizards flying in the sky." Mimran, who looked like a mechanical gnome, had 2 light bulb eyes that kept flashing. That's right, Duque was F*King crazy about the Alliance's technology tree again. The biggest feature of transmigrators adding talent points was that they wouldn't add the wrong talent points. In fact, 1 kilometer behind the group of Twilight Dragons, Izura was leading a large group of green dragons to help the Alliance. "Sister, I don't think we need to help Duque's side. Whether we need to or not is one thing, whether we go or not is another. Go quickly, don't be in a straight line with the Twilight Dragons and the Alliance's cannons. Follow them from the side and back. If necessary, help at any time," Alexstrasza instructed. The main force of the Twilight Dragons had turned east, which meant that the pressure on the 4-colored dragons was greatly reduced. In theory, concentrating all the dragons to besiege Nesario was the right way to go, but she couldn't let such a large group of Twilight Dragons run around. In fact, except for Izura, who was particularly confident in Duque, many green dragons didn't think that mere mortals could block thousands of Twilight Dragons with their flying creations alone. In their eyes, the thin 3-dimensional defense line of the Alliance's flying fleet was no match for the locust-like Twilight Dragons, be it in terms of strength or visual effects. In particular, when the Alliance's first round of main cannons fire did not even bring down a single Twilight Dragon, most of the green dragons in the Green Dragon Army confirmed their thoughts. Chapter 1856. After all, they were a group of true dragons that were charging over aggressively. Regardless of whether they were products of accelerated growth or not, they were not a bunch of buzzing locusts, but creatures at the top of the food chain on planet Azeroth. Under everyone's gazes, the purplish-red ominous dragon cloud was getting closer and closer to the Alliance's air fleets and strongholds. Everyone knew that unless it was a dragon that was good at magic, a dragon's attack range was basically no more than 200 meters. Beyond 200 meters, the dragons could only passively take a beating. Once within 200 meters, the giant dragons would use their dragon breath, their powerful bodies, their sharp claws, and their tails, which were even more terrifying than siege hammers, to teach anyone who dared to enter the giant dragon's killing range a lesson. Apart from a few powerful creatures like golems, most existences would only feel the deepest despair and helplessness when faced with a dragon at close range. It was the same for the Alliance's battleships. If the largest main cannon could not penetrate the dragon's scales and skin, then the smaller cannons and anti-aircraft cannons would not be able to do so. At this moment, the Alliance's strongholds and battleships suddenly flashed with a blinding light. The Alliance had fired again. No one took this volley of cannons seriously. The purplish-red dragon cloud that looked like it was rolling over finally collided with the dense black dots formed by the cannonballs. Just as the new cannonball was fired, Duque smiled and said, "Actually, dragon scales and skin are fine. We might as well change our way of thinking and treat them as more durable sloped armor. As long as we find the right way, it's easy to penetrate them." "Is that so?" Bu Lang stroked his beard. The great gnome craftsman Jurban was also scratching his bald head. Why did the dwarves and gnomes like Duque so much? Wasn't it because Xueqi could always give them a lot of scientific inspiration, allowing their most beloved technology to advance? Xueqi had many ideas, and they were even more creative than Mimiren's bold and imaginative ideas. What was even more impressive was that most of Xueqi's ideas were feasible. Xueqi's words had undoubtedly opened a new window for the two of them. Even Mimir began to mutter to himself. The speed of the cannonball was very fast. If one's eyesight was good enough, they would discover that the cannonball was actually just a flying tool. It was just that it was faster. The cutting-edge cannonballs tore through the atmosphere at high speed. Some of the cannonballs even left long white lines as they passed through the clouds. The metallic afterimages pulled out beams of light in the air and pierced into the group of twilight dragons like sharp blades. This time, these creatures that came from the Black Dragon King's family's Black Technology Laboratory were not so lucky. In an instant, their wings or bodies were pierced. Perhaps it was because of the amount of gunpowder in the shell, or some other reason. Only about 100 twilight dragons howled as they fell from the sky, sprinkling a foul and evil rain of blood. Even so, there was a burst of loud and clear cheers in the fortress command. Hooray! Success! We've finally defeated those damned lizards. He had only killed less than 100 twilight dragons, which was a negligible loss for a group of more than 3,000 dragons. Hidden behind this small victory was the victory of mortals and technology. The Alliance's technology continued to develop, and today, they could already use their own new inventions to deal with the creatures at the top of the food chain on this planet, the giant dragons. It was not difficult to envision that in the near future, weapons that could kill demons on a large scale could be developed. This was what encouraged the party of technology, which was led by the dwarves and gnomes. Gerben almost jumped in front of Xueqi and shook hands with Xueqi. Congratulations. Your tungsten core armor-piercing shell was a success. Xueqi replied with a smile. It's our tungsten core armor-piercing shell. Gerben said with great sincerity. No, no, no. Without your idea, none of us would have thought of such a method. We're just the processors of science. Xueqi said something extremely cool. Then, I'm actually just standing on the shoulders of the giants of science. At this moment, even Bu Lang, who was commanding, and Mimiron, who was watching the battle, as well as the dwarves, gnome scientists and craftsmen, were all in awe of Xueqi. The tungsten core armor-piercing shell was something that Xueqi had created using his transmigrator knowledge. The tungsten core armor-piercing shell was actually an excellent armor-piercing shell developed after the 1970s on Earth. The warhead of this armor-piercing shell used the principle of shell removal and the new structure and materials of high-density tungsten alloy. It had characteristics such as high initial velocity, low trajectory, short flight time, high accuracy, and great penetration power. It could effectively deal with fast-moving targets. The density of the core was high, and it was the complete opposite of hard steel or tungsten carbide cores that would shatter during the penetration process. The tungsten alloy core was more malleable and could penetrate armor by splashing. It had excellent secondary penetration characteristics, and it was more effective against large angles, sandwich, and multi-layered composite armor. It was widely used in large-caliber guns and small-caliber artillery shells at home and abroad as ammunition against lightly armored targets such as armored transport vehicles and attack helicopters. It just so happened that Azeroth had discovered the tungsten, and Xueqi had conveniently used it. Originally, with the industrial foundation of the Alliance, it was not enough to produce such a beautiful tungsten core armor-piercing shell. With Mimiren's workshop, this problem was easily solved. However, to avoid provoking the dragon's slumber temple, Xueqi had deliberately ordered the armor-piercing shell to be filled with less gunpowder and not use additional fragmentation structures. However, Xueqi had ordered the engraving of some fire elemental runes. Otherwise, this round of bombardment alone would have been enough to teach those stupid twilight dragons a lesson. If they survived, they would have to remember to take a detour when they saw the Alliance's warships in the future. In fact, the twilight dragons that were hit this time, unless they were especially unfortunate and had been hit by dozens of cannons, they would not die. Most of the twilight dragons that were shot would be injured but not killed. It was not the kind of fatal injury, but the kind that just happened to penetrate the dragon's scales and skin, but could not penetrate the flesh. Stimulated by this round of bombardment, the twilight dragons immediately roared and accelerated towards the Alliance's fleet. On the other side, the Green Dragon army was also shocked. Seeing that although the twilight dragons had suffered losses, their losses were limited. They actually felt an inexplicable sense of peace. It turned out that mortals were not particularly powerful. In their hearts, the green dragons could not help but acknowledge the strength of the alliance. Just as the twilight dragons flew to within a kilometer of Naxxramas and the flying fleet, the fortress and the large spaceships suddenly opened their hatches one by one, revealing the real killer move inside. The entire airspace suddenly flashed with an incomparably dazzling fire. Chapter 1857. In the flying magic city of Dalajan, there were thousands of magic cannons of various calibers and different elemental power outputs. In the mouth of the dragons, the magic cannons that these humans and elves were so proud of were called weak, because they were the most superficial use of the elements. In order to ensure the stability and operability of the cannons, the magic craftsmen had to repeatedly reduce the total output of the elements and reduce their fluctuations. And the high-level mysteries would undoubtedly crush the low-level mysteries. This kind of magic cannon with low elemental energy and elemental density was, of course, regarded as a toy by the dragons. Now, all history had been rewritten. After all, if there were genuine fire elemental creatures as cannons, who would need a special cannon to guide the fire elemental? That's right. Standing in front of the wide-open cabin doors were fat fire elemental beings that were docilely standing in a battle formation. These fire elemental creatures burned thousands or even tens of thousands of degrees all over their bodies. Their existence itself was a great pressure on the surrounding environment. For example, without those special frost protection circles, not to mention Naxxramas, it was estimated that the decks of those big ships would melt. With those circles, the fire elemental creatures inside would be extremely unhappy. In the past, these irascible guys would definitely give the mages who controlled them a headache. Now, under the supervision of the fire demon troops directly under the King of Flames, Xueqi, these simple-minded fire elemental creatures stood like obedient babies. After studying the attack range of the fire elemental creatures, Bu Lang, the master of artillery, endured until the last kilometer before opening the hatch. It was not until the last 500 meters that he gave the order to open fire. Thick flaming arms rose up, and the purest and most primitive fire elements shot out from their palms. In the void near each battleship with fire elemental creatures, more fire elements could be seen connecting here through the void channel. From a distance, each battleship looked like a Titan battleship wrapped in a huge flame rune network. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. There was no deafening roar of the cannons, but the fire elements that poured out in 3 or 4 breaths had a terrifying destructive power far beyond that of conventional artillery. From the 10 rows of hatches in the Naxxramas stronghold, in addition to the full firepower of 300 battleships, these tens of thousands of fire elemental elites were enough to boil the entire airspace. You can't hit the Twilight Wyvern when it's in rapid evasion? Never mind. If he couldn't hit the front, he could still hit the back. Even if he missed, he could at least increase the density of fire elements in the air. What was an explosion? An explosion would release a large amount of energy in an extremely short period of time, producing a high temperature and releasing a large amount of gas. It causes a high-pressure chemical reaction or state change in the surrounding medium, and is extremely destructive at the same time. Generally speaking, this required a small space. Xueqi's fighting style was even more imposing. He commanded the fire elemental creatures to heat up the space that the Twilight Dragon was about to pass through. It was a vast space with a diameter of nearly 1 kilometer. There was no obstruction or separation, and a strong wind blew past. Normally, this would be impossible to achieve. But as the actual controller of the 3 great elemental realms of Azeroth, water, fire, and wind, turning the impossible into the possible was what Xueqi was doing. On an open-air platform to the west of Naxxramas, 2 blonde and 1 silver-haired elven women stood there, letting the wind blow their long hair. If you carefully sensed it, you would know that the wind demigod, the 3 Windrunner sisters, led by Sylvanas, were controlling the flow of the air in the surrounding atmosphere. A huge wind elemental shield that the Twilight Wyvern couldn't see was preventing the fire elements from escaping. Then, everything fell into place. Heat up. Heat up. Heat up again. From an ordinary fireball of a few hundred degrees, the surrounding temperature suddenly rose to over 1,000 degrees. At first, the simple-minded Twilight Wyvern didn't react, only thinking that it was an illusion. When the surrounding temperature suddenly jumped from 1,000 degrees to 2,000 degrees, they finally felt that something was wrong. This wasn't normal. This wasn't the temperature that should belong to the mortal world. They began to roar and ask their companions what was going on with their dragon language. But their recklessness and lack of discipline caused them to be in chaos. Because the sky echoed, "Can't even stand this temperature, you're a pig." Such mockery, and even the thick-skinned Twilight Wyvern took the initiative to eat a fireball or two, declaring that their magic resistance was high enough. When they found that in just a few seconds, the temperature soared to 3,000 degrees, the Twilight Wyverns finally panicked. They asked their leader, Valerian and Serenarian, one after another. But these two guys were also weirdos. Valerian and Serenarian, who had miraculously grown up, were supposed to serve as role models for the new generation of Twilight Wyverns, leading their offspring to devour the life of Azeroth. However, they always wasted their unparalleled power on fighting and quarreling. One said to turn around and run, the other said to continue forward. It was in such a quarrel that the Twilight Wyverns completely lost their last chance to escape. Boom! From a distance, Naxxramas looked like a terrifying main cannon with a diameter of more than 1 kilometer, powerful enough to destroy the world. This was the result of the three Queen Sylvana sisters' efforts to use the wind element to make elemental guidance. When a huge amount of fire elements accumulated and exploded, Queen Sylvanas let the fire elements pour towards the west side of the Twilight Wyverns. It looked like a huge short-barreled gun had fired towards the west. It was just that the power was comparable to a mushroom cloud. Even the initiators of the explosion, the Alliance soldiers, the fire demons, and the fire elemental creatures themselves were a little unsure that this explosion was their own masterpiece. The entire Alliance fleet was silent for a full 3 seconds before bursting into thunderous cheers. Hooray! Ha ha ha! You're dead. I think they're all dead. This is what you get for looking down on us mortals. Many Alliance soldiers took off their helmets and hats and threw them into the air. Well, forget about the hats, the helmets hit a lot of people when they fell due to gravity. This was a man-made fiery hell. They were dealing with the dragons at the top of the food chain on this planet. Of course, this could also be seen as a joint attack by the fire and wind elementals against the Twilight Wyverns. In fact, Xueqi did not directly attack, and Queen Sylvanas' attack was the icing on the cake. Xueqi believed that even if Queen Sylvanas did not attack, the result would be quite glorious. Just to be on the safe side, they did not want the fire elements to flow back and blow back to Naxxramas and the flying battleship, so the three Windrunner sisters attacked. Chapter 1858. The result of the battle was glorious. This attack, which could be described as strangling or incinerating, lasted for a full 10 breaths in the air. If this was a classic aerial battle between dragons, there would probably be a rain of dirty blood, dragon scales, dragon skin, body parts, and organs that should have been priceless. Unfortunately, there was none. Only a small group of Twilight Wyrms with the strongest magic resistance could withstand the ultra-high temperature flames with their Twilight domain. The Twilight realm wasn't omnipotent. When the energy transmitted exceeded the limit of what one could withstand, an even more exaggerated explosion would occur. From start to finish, the energy burst out from every organ of the Twilight dragon that could store energy, forming a larger second explosion. It looked more like a chain explosion. The lucky ones were directly swallowed by the fire elements and turned into burnt chickens, falling from the sky. The unlucky bastard had unluckily activated the Twilight domain in time and absorbed too much energy. As a result, he had been blown up and died without a complete corpse. Everyone who witnessed this scene was stunned, be it the Alliance who led the battle or the Green Dragon Army who were just bystanders. The dazzling flames didn't last long, and the death realm of fire quickly dissipated after losing its support. The Twilight Dragon was still wandering in the air like a wandering ghost, not knowing what to do. Now, there were only 3 to 5 of them left. The charcoal-like Variona and Serenarian were completely stunned. After coming back to their senses, they continued to fight among themselves. It's all your fault. I said that we wouldn't have to die if we retreated. It's all your fault. We should have just charged forward. The 2 Twilight Dragon leaders were like idiots trying to drag each other down. They didn't realize that the Green Dragon Army had split up behind them. The main force had already started to fly back, but Isra and a few ancient green dragons started to climb rapidly and dive down. What a perfect timing. Isra glanced at the black figure that was diving down from the northeast at about the same height as her. Onyxia might not be good at fighting enemies head-on, but when it came to bullying noobs, no one was better than her. When Variona and Serenarian abandoned her and stopped chasing, she didn't pursue them. Instead, she followed Xueqi's theory of aerial combat and pursued height. Diving down from a high place was always easier than climbing up from a low place, and it was also more powerful. As a dragon aspect that controlled a portion of the fire elemental world's elements, Onyxia only needed a single thought for the fire elemental elements around her to follow her as she dove down at high speed. The fire elemental elements that had already begun to dissipate were sucked into her body at a speed faster than her dive. Her true form was that of a black dragon. From afar, Onyxia looked like a huge red dragon, drawing a cone-shaped formation of flames in the air. When she swooped down at high speed, she actually pulled out a long line of fire that resembled the tail of a comet. It looked as if it had already split the entire sky. The ferocious attack startled Valriona and Cenarion. The two twilight dragons, who had been dragging each other down, did something extremely stupid. Seeing that they couldn't dodge Onyxia's attack no matter how fast they accelerated, they actually tried to use each other's bodies to block the black dragon's first attack. One should not be afraid of a godlike enemy, but a pig-like teammate. Onyxia might look like she was going all out, but she actually cherished her life more than anyone else. Unfortunately, the twilight dragons didn't know that. When she reached the peak of her speed, a huge amount of fire elemental elements gathered in front of her dragon's head. It looked like a fire spear extending from the black dragon's head. Bam! Bam! This was the second consecutive attack that shook the atmosphere. Onyxia's larger body crashed into the middle of the two twilight dragons who seemed to be dancing a pas de deux. If one of the dragons had the guts to extend its claws and give Onyxia a vicious blow, it might have ended in a lose-lose situation. However, both Valriona and Cenarion's reaction at the last moment was to run. They only opened up half of their twilight domain to defend themselves, but they were also afraid that they would absorb too much fire elemental elements and blow themselves up. That was hilarious. If Onyxia had split the fire elemental elements she brought with her into two, either of them would have been able to handle it. But how could the black dragon, who was an expert at bullying noobs, give them the chance to do so? Hee hee. Don't even think about escaping. Onyxia, who had not used her full strength in the first place, did a rather damaging thing. She did split the power in her body into two, but all the fire elemental elements were aimed at Cenarion while she pounced at Valriona. According to Duke's secret instructions when he was training the dragon, plus her own observations, she was very sure that the two of them would never cover for each other. As expected, Cenarion's first reaction was to run when he saw the overwhelming amount of high-purity fire elemental elements coming at him. But Valriona's first reaction was to face it angrily. The energy theory of aerial combat was fully validated at this moment. Onyxia, who was faster, flew in a small arc and easily dodged Valriona's clumsy bite, as well as her follow-up claw attack. Then, the black dragon used the inertia from the high-speed dive to make an emergency hover with her wings and swung her thick and long tail in a perfect semicircle, hitting Valriona's right arm hard. It was better to break one than to injure 10 fingers. She learned how Duque treated her in the past and used it to deal with her enemies. The force of a dragon aspect's attack, coupled with the huge inertia from the acceleration of gravity, was more than 100 tons. It was a blow that could even shatter a mountain. Valriona let out the most miserable scream since the start of the battle. Not only her right arm, but half of her body, including her right arm and chest, was blasted into pieces. The sharp spikes on the black dragon's meteor hammer-like tail even tore a few pieces of Valriona's lung tissue out. She tried to retaliate in pain and anger, but the black dragon dodged her attack. This time, Onyxia was very patient. Her larger dragon body circled Valriona in the air and attacked more agilely. Almost every time, she would grab the collapsed right side of Valriona's body to attack, constantly increasing the damage. Victory was only a matter of time. Cenarion, on the other hand, had to expand his twilight domain to the maximum after taking all the fire elemental attacks from Onyxia. He would either overexert himself or be seriously injured by the second flame bombardment. He obviously chose the former.